The day began normally and was no different from any other. The boys joked and bragged. The guy walked along listening to music on his headphones. No one suspected trouble. Suddenly, a bright light flashed ahead. People froze in amazement. Something strange was starting to happen. The city was engulfed in a mysterious light, and a gaping abyss opened before our eyes. Panic. People thought there was an earthquake or a terrorist attack. It was the last peaceful day of their lives. The guy wondered if this interworldly movement to another world, something he had so often read about in novels and manhwas, was really happening to him right now. The connection was interrupted. Pop-up windows and notifications appeared all around. An unknown game began. A notification appeared asking you to roll your dice. Game, cubes, what does it mean? The guy thought. Suddenly, the girl next to him screamed, in surprise and fear, pointing up. A giant cube appeared in the sky. It was slowly approaching, spinning. It seemed like part of a terrible game. The cube fell onto the field. Piece number 8 moved 3 squares. The ground beneath their feet shook, and the city began to move. The boy realized that they were not players. They were pawns. Their house was just a token on a huge game board. He guessed that the player was the entity that had thrown the dice. The player decides everything. The movement stopped. But if they wanted a token, they could have just moved the city. There's a reason we were drafted along with it. A new task appeared. They arrived at the defense cell. Difficulty level 1, duration 3 days, indicated the values of the cube. The creation of the map has begun. The defense mission will begin now. The earth rose as if alive. People were preparing to defend the base. Conditions for defeat are the destruction of 4 bases. In case of defeat, the token will be destroyed forever. People were screaming, asking for everything to be returned. Fear and panic were growing, but the game was no longer allowing them to stop. What would happen to them was the main question. All the shouting seemed pointless. If they wanted to communicate, they would have already contacted them directly. The only thing left to do was to monitor the alerts. The provision of weapons and equipment to residents began. A new message has appeared asking all city residents to roll their dice for the next turn. Item classes were divided as follows: 100, Mythical, 95 to 99, Legendary, 81 to 94, Heroic, 61 to 80, Magical, from 1 to 60, Normal class. In his hands was a 100-sided cube, a round ball with dots and numbers, which was supposed to decide fate. Panic broke out in the crowd. Something was approaching, but it was clearly not a rescue team. The monsters burst out of the shadows, and people began to flee, trying to escape the ruthless predators. Screams and groans filled the air. Someone fell. Someone was wounded. The battle for survival began. The goblin with the bat almost reached him, and suddenly he flew into the air from the blow. He understood that people were needed to protect the chip, to support and continue the game in their world. As he fell, he thought about how they needed to protect the token city in order to continue moving towards the goal. Players are powerful beings, reminiscent of gods or demons, who decide the fate of people. He fell onto a pile of cardboard boxes, the goblin looking down on him, blood dripping from the bat. It was a grim picture. Suddenly, a girl with fiery wings and a spear appeared behind the goblin, and she thrust it into the ground. A fiery whirlwind rose up around them, a tornado of flames swirling, lifting the goblins into the air. That day, ordinary life disappeared. An extraordinary first chapter of a new game began. It was the first day of the new year, and the city was filled with the fallen, countless dead, and also the emergence of new heroes. Character, name, Choi. Level, 1. Class, ordinary citizen. Pawn in someone else's game. The guy was lying among crumpled boxes, wounded, unconscious, but with a cube in his hand. The cube fell from his hand and began to spin, as if deciding fate. The cube stopped at 100. Mythical class, a sign of power and curse. This number meant the beginning of a new path, but also that soon he would be treated worse than trash. A book has appeared. The Demon King of Sovereignty Krasin, a mythical magical text. The book gave permission to use the Demon King's library. Knowledge about the world, missions, monsters, and items. Allows you to find out information of any kind. She hovered in a magic ball, opening and leafing through it herself, like a living source of information. But Krasin is the embodiment of greed. He monopolizes all the rewards that come from this knowledge. All the successes and rewards of the survivors who received the help given by this force will pass into the hands of the owner of the book. Krasin. 3 hours of defense, 3,102 dead, and 7,023 wounded. One base completely destroyed. The price of victory is high. The girl with the spear loudly declared, "The mission is over. They survived and won." People rejoiced, despite the losses. Suddenly, a truck pulled up, and shouts began to ring out from the crowd. The Korean army had arrived to help. Soldiers with guns ordered the wounded and civilians to immediately load into trucks for evacuation. The evacuation was directed towards the television tower, the last stronghold of security and communication with the outside world. The soldier praised Miss Heja for her courage, and she humbly accepted the gratitude, calling it all a trifle. Thanks to the time gained, the army and police are now organized and are being distributed to different positions, preparing for new challenges. A soldier named Kwan is a normal citizen, level 1, now wearing a cultist helmet. The heroic class helmet that belonged to Inquisitor Hilden was on his head, granting him protection. Iron faith prevented one from falling into confusion, fear, or fascination, an important advantage in combat. Ms. Hyo-ju was informed that the communication and internet were disconnected, and it was difficult to assess the situation at this time. Shortwave radios help maintain contact. Reports from other areas of the battle will soon arrive. The military man suggested going to the TV tower, the last stronghold and command post for coordination. Suddenly a scream was heard. The wave of enemies was not over yet. The boss would appear soon. Choi explained that the book contains all the information about the quest, monsters, and progress level. However, the book turned out to be empty. The pages did not contain data for other team members. Hyoju said that only Choi can see the manual. The book is a personal reference. The soldier thought, if this is true, the book is priceless, because knowledge is power. Kwan was surprised. He did not believe it at first, but the book contained important data. He demanded proof of the contents. Choi began to read. Heldin's helmet is a heroic item from the full set. There were only 21 days left until Kwan's demobilization. Choi listed Hyoju's legendary weapon, the Fire Dragon's Imperial Prominence Fang. The girl tried to change the subject, but he even mentioned her favorite karaoke song. It was her secret. Personal information confirmed the book's veracity. It really was a reference book. The team realized that the boss was approaching. The book helped and confirmed their strength and abilities. The soldier promised to contact headquarters and asked to wait for further instructions. Everyone realized that the game was going on. Sometimes he thought, if this world is a game, he is a bugged character, because everything is too simple for him. Perhaps a moderator found a bug and isolated it, preventing it from reaching the outside world. If only the day would come when he would come out into the world, then everything would change. The military man reported that headquarters had given permission to trust his information. As much data and countermeasures as possible were needed. Choi accepted responsibility, began checking communications and preparing for a detailed report. The task is to protect 4 bases from waves of monsters. Attacks occur every 4 hours. At the end of each wave, there is a boss. The boss is a 2-headed ogre, fights with melee and magic at the same time. Difficulty is 1. In 3 days, You need to repel 12 waves, 4 times a day, and defeat each wave boss. Choi suggested using the knowledge they had gained and developing a joint strategy. Then they would definitely be able to survive. And later, he will look for a way to return back to the real world. The girl noticed that he was thinking not only about the mission, but also about what would happen next. He started, although he should have checked everything then, because Choi was unconscious when he received the book and did not read the description of the task. Krasen's book stated that all the survivors' rewards would go to its owner, the Demon King. The list of victims grew, not only those who heard directly, but also those who received assistance. This meant not only people who heard the information directly from Choi, but also those who heard the information from someone else, heard rumors, and the like. The source of all information was Choi. The military shouted about the attack. Goblins. We need to use weapons with a fire attribute, Choi advised. The monsters advanced, the battle continued. Choi spoke, and the army fought desperately. Miss Hyeju fought the monsters, following Jong's instructions, and won. The first wave was over. The situation was under control. But the war was just beginning. At this time, the demonic king of the sovereignty of Krasin sat on the throne, among many riches. He was chained, but a smile played on his face. Chip number 8. A city with 193,256 inhabitants. 176,542 are listed as victims of sovereignty. He understood that 91% of the population was already doomed in one day, and this was only the beginning of the horror. This was only the beginning of his sins, which continued until the very end of the game. The defense mission was like a strategy game where you had to defend your base from continuous waves of enemies. The monsters moved straight towards the bases, trying to destroy them and stop the defense. Players created forces and built fortifications to prevent enemies from passing. Each wave became more difficult, forcing them to adapt and improve. Choi gave commands through the radio. First, shoot monsters from a long distance with a weapon that hits a large area. While the weapon used is on reload, attack with another ranged weapon. The first-level monsters were weak-minded and easily susceptible to traps and maneuvers. The barriers were weak, so Choi asked not to waste ammunition by choosing the right positions. The tactic consisted of dividing the enemy and luring them into places advantageous to the defenders. After that, well-equipped fighters destroyed the remaining monsters from close range. Choi transmitted coordinates to strengthen positions, coordinating the actions of the defenders via radio. Krasen's book was updated in real time, providing all the necessary information. It was enough to mentally select the necessary data, and they immediately appeared on the pages of the book. Choi was confident in his abilities, believing that with this book, they could survive and win. A thick cloud of black smoke rose above the city, the traces of a fierce battle and the burning bodies of monsters. The troops held their ground. The monsters received mortal wounds. Their screams were heard everywhere. The situation was under control. The third squad was supposed to survey the territory. Kwan sent a report to Choi, who, despite his civilian rank, became the center of the entire defense. At first, his instructions were advisory in nature. The final decision was made by the command. But over time, everything changed. Now it felt like Choi was the one running the city. Kwan thought, after all, Krasen's book is just a reference book. How then did Choi have such a level of influence to gain control over an entire city? Maybe this is due to the book. Sergeant Kwan, Choi called out to him, speaking calmly and confidently. What happened? Kwan asked, looking at him suspiciously, trusting his intuition. It's almost finished, Choi said confidently, looking at the book, the pages of which glowed with a magical light. He meant the last wave, the sergeant clarified, sensing the tension. The boss is approaching. But there is no need to worry, Choi replied, and closed the book. He was confident that Miss Hyeju would be able to handle this boss in one fell swoop. Heju woke up in her sleeping bag and immediately felt heavy breathing, as if something huge was hanging over her. Before her stood the stone face of a monster, a gray face with a distorted scream and empty eyes. The giant slowly approached, emitting a booming roar, shaking the ground with every step. The truck sped along the bumpy road outside the city, leaving behind a dusty trail and a restless pursuer. Behind the car was a monster chasing, the mission boss, Giant Billy, huge but clumsy, weak in combat skills. Heju finally woke up, realizing that the fight had already begun, and there was no time to think. They lured the boss outside the city to avoid destruction and minimize losses. A fight within the city would be a disaster. The boss could destroy the base in a couple of hits. The giant had no resistance to the elements, making him vulnerable to targeted magical attacks. The car served as bait, leading the boss to a pre-selected ambush point. There were only 3 inside, but one of them was capable of defeating the target alone. The car stopped at the edge of the wasteland, and 3 fighters stepped out to meet the approaching stone monster. Heju hesitated. She didn't know what to do. But Choi explained that items above heroic rank will reveal hidden abilities when the conditions are met. If certain conditions are met, its form will change or new possibilities will open up. To find out this feature, you need to fulfill the conditions. The book showed Choi all the hidden features of all objects. Heju stood before the giant, ready to test the weapon. Although her inner fear was mixed with determination, Choi assured her to trust him. He was confident in this book. She didn't like it very much, but she trusted him. The monster raised both hands and brought down a blow on the girl. The earth shook, and dust rose up in a thick cloud. Choi and Sergeant Kwan stood frozen in the distance, expecting the worst. But suddenly, a scarlet glow erupted from beneath the monster's hands. The activation conditions were met. The spear's energy flared up, and a fiery dragon's face formed in the sky. The spear's hidden skill was activated as Summon Imperial Fire Dragon, with a limit of once per quest. The flames flared up in a blinding column, their glow visible even above the city ruins on the horizon. The dragon pierced the giant's stone flesh with a blast of fire, splitting the enemy and turning him into molten debris. The howl of flame died down. The colossus collapsed, leaving only smoking fragments and a circle of molten earth around. Kwan noted that using the skill in an urban area would lead to a catastrophe and irreparable casualties. He understood that the book contained an even more dangerous potential that could change the course of the entire upcoming war. After the fight ended, Kwan kept a close eye on Choi, realizing how dangerous a man with such a powerful source of knowledge could be. He came to the conclusion that misuse of the book could lead to a catastrophe for the entire city, and noted with relief that the artifact ended up in Choi's hands. An announcement was made on air about the completion of the defensive mission. Residents who found themselves outside the city were subject to automatic return. The survivors were given a reward. The crowd gathered in the center began chanting the names of Choi and Hyeju, expressing gratitude and admiration. Completing the mission without causing any destruction was worth 300 points, but losing one base reduced the total by 25%, resulting in 225 points. Individual rewards were to be distributed based on participation in killing monsters, defending bases, and the final boss fight. People looked at each other in surprise. Everything that was happening was becoming more and more like a game. The system has opened access to new functionality: a store, treatment, experience, skills, equipment, books, trade, and auction. The survivors hugged each other, happy to be alive. A medical shop opens in the infirmary. For 10 points, healing and purification. For 20, damage regeneration. The wounded rush to choose healing, and Choi is relieved that the victims will soon be safe. Kwan, Hee-ju, and Choi try to figure out why their personal points balance has suddenly dropped to 0. The system announces that all rewards have been absorbed by the sacrifice to sovereignty effect, and the count has been reset. The crowd is indignant and demands the glasses be returned, not understanding the meaning of the mysterious ritual that deprived them of resources. A scale of victims sacrificed appears. At 90% of the population, the reward is multiplied by 100 times, confirming the terrible price. The leaderboard appears. Third place, Smith, 312 points. Second place, Khan, 1,402 points. The leaderboard is shocking. Choi is in first place, with almost 10 billion points, while the rest have only hundreds. Outraged people blame Choi for the disaster and threaten to punish him for his monopoly on the reward. Kwan offers to share points to save the wounded, but the system blocks any transfer of points. The book's monopoly desire prohibits exchange even through the purchase and subsequent distribution of items. In despair, Choi throws down the artifact, but the book instantly returns to his hands, as if bound by will. Panic turns to rage as the death toll rises and the crowd searches for Choi, begging for at least 10 points. The corridors fill with screams, groans of the wounded, and accusations, while the system coldly records the losses. Choi frantically flips through the pages, hoping to find a way around the ban, but finds no solution. Seeing the chaos escalate, Kwan raises his gun and presses the barrel into the back of Choi's head in an attempt to stop the crisis. The air freezes in tension between the hope of salvation and the threat of a new round of bloodshed. Kwan publicly announced Choi's arrest, and an angry crowd demanded execution for the stolen awards and the deaths of the wounded. Under the cover noise, Kwan whispered that this was an escape plan, believing that only a fugitive could find a way to lift the book's curse. The crowd noticed the maneuver and rushed forward, but Heiju and the military held back the onslaught, stopping the trial of the enraged crowd. Choi opened a shop, instantly exchanging billions of points for a pack of agility upgrades, each worth 10 points. After the third purchase, his body acquired an inhuman lightness, and he rose into the air, eluding his pursuers. People were dumbfounded, watching as the outcast, declared the culprit of the troubles, was not restrained by rage, weapons, or threats. The system displayed a timer for the next wave. 23 hours, 59 minutes, 59 seconds until start. Panic increased. 24 hours seemed too short for evacuation, treatment, and searching for alternative glasses. Kwan organized the loading of the wounded, directing columns to the safe zone, although he could no longer guarantee safety. Heiju, shocked by the events, understood that the fate of the city and responsibility for millions of lives fell on the shoulders of the fugitive Choi. Men in vests used loudspeakers to coordinate the crowd, dividing people into those ready to fight and those who wanted to evacuate. People were reminded of the importance of regularly checking status windows to avoid unexpected changes or signs of victimization. Evacuation centers and temporary bases were marked, and everyone was urged to remember their locations. Particular attention was paid to the announcement about Choi. If he appeared, it was recommended to flee immediately without making contact. Any information received from Choi, even advice or strategy, was now considered potentially infected with the curse of sovereignty. Those who heard such information were asked to voluntarily isolate themselves until the end of the mission to prevent the curse from spreading. Those who ignore this order and hide the fact of infection have been warned. Their actions will be considered a crime. Military officer Kwan stood next to the tactical map, analyzing the new combat situation with other officers. Miss Hyo-ju was training at this time. Her movements were fast and precise. The battles of the past few days had changed her. The panic among citizens did not subside. Some rushed to overcrowded hospitals, others to churches, hoping to find some solace there. The atmosphere in the city became increasingly tense. A system notification sounded. Start of a new move. Players, please roll your dice. The numbers changed in the air, like in a board game. The result appeared. Chip number 8 moves 4 squares forward. You have arrived at the Demon King's Seal Square. New alerts immediately began to sound. Demonic columns supporting the seal, and the defenders of these columns were appearing. Destroy all the demonic pillars. If you do not destroy them within the allotted time, the Demon King will be summoned. The system continued. Mission duration, determination, 5 days. Determination of the number of columns. 3. Defining the defender's danger level. First column, difficulty level 1. The defender of the first column turned out to be the boss, a fallen angel, deprived of destiny. This creature wandered around the area, trying to regain what was lost, reflecting the emptiness of its fate in every movement. The defender of the second column also had the first level of difficulty, but his nature was completely different. A mad brain, a being that never stops creating from the chaos of time. His abilities grew stronger with each passing moment, creating a sense of inexorable progress and a threat that gave no respite. The third column was guarded by the boss of the third level, the Goblin Jack, a master of fencing. This goblin, who had reached the heights of martial arts and had undergone body transformation, possessed deadly agility and skills. His goal was to destroy the Demon King's seal in order to face the Demon King himself in the final battle. This threat made the military man Quan and Miss Hyoju think deeply. The upcoming fight will be incredibly difficult and dangerous. At this time, Choi was lying on the floor among his notes and smiling. Military man Quan, speaking into his radio, received a message that civilians were attacking. Attempts to stop them were unsuccessful. The people did not obey orders. Quan decided that it was time for them to move out too. Miss Hyeju was informed by a military man that she had left some time ago. Quan thought bitterly about the chaos that had ensued. The well-thought-out system and coordination had fallen apart the very next day. Miss Hyeju observed the enemy, a level 3 pillar defender. She was determined to destroy him before anyone got hurt. When she went on the attack, the enemy stopped her with one swing of his sword, throwing her back with a magical blow. At that moment, Choi appeared nearby and caught her. He said that he was going to take all the awards for himself and ordered that they be passed on to the people. Miss Hyeju was shocked by this decision and tried to stop him, but he held the book firmly in his hands. He explained that he saw no other way to return the people's rewards or get rid of the Demon King's cursed book. Choi decided to spend points on upgrading his stats. The stat shop opened. The level increased by 1 for each improved stat. His current status was level 30, agility 30, other stats 0. The system asked which characteristic he wanted to increase and by how much, to which he replied that he wanted to increase all characteristics to the maximum. Hyoju was surprised by what was happening. Suddenly, a ringing sound was heard and messages started appearing on the screen. A resident named Choi was the first to achieve maximum values of endurance, intelligence, wisdom, agility, and health. Everyone received the corresponding notification. Then, Choi was also the first to reach the maximum luck. The system answered his question about the number of equipment cubes received. There were 423,512 in total. It was instructed to get rid of all equipment below the magic class, and dice that gave items of at least the heroic class were automatically rolled. After that, the system gave out information. 142 legendary class items and 1,023 heroic class items were received. All dice were successfully rolled, and the identification of the received equipment began. Choi decided to use all the equipment and rewards he received exclusively for his own strengthening, since he had no opportunity to share them with others. He was angry at these damned rewards and the power of the Demon King they represented. But deep down, Choi was determined to protect the city in this endless game and return to normal life. If this was the only way to atone for his sins, He was ready to accept any insults and mistrust from people. The master swordsman, Goblin Jack, smiled as he prepared to attack at the sight of his strong opponent. Choi didn't waste time on the fight. He didn't have time for these games. He quickly disappeared. Using the Shoes of Magical Wind, a heroic rank artifact that allows you to hover in the air, change the trajectory of your jumps, and almost fly by consuming mana. He promised to return soon and asked the fencer to wait. Miss Hyoju watched the confused Goblin Jack. She was surprised that he was not going to attack first. This was the essence of his tactics as a defender of the column. He will not attack first. In other words, he will not attack those who have not attacked him. Jumping from rooftop to rooftop of the tall buildings, Choi thought it would be better to deal with the other pillar defenders first. He delivered a powerful kick to the monster's head to weaken the enemy. Choi returned with all his points used up, causing a wave of discontent among the people. The crowd was filled with rage and wanted to destroy him. They watched as he moved across the sky with inexorable force. The unique features of the column defender are revealed only when certain conditions are met. Choi speculated that some of these features could weaken the enemy, but the wrong approach will only strengthen it or awaken particularly irritating abilities. The thought that the defender would kill 100 people seemed especially dangerous. He evolves into a fallen angel who will destroy all of humanity. Will become significantly stronger and leave the column, driven by the thirst for murder. Choi decided to first deal with the pillar defenders who had dangerous abilities and unlock the abilities needed for the mission. For him, it was not so much the fulfillment of the mission that was important, but the correct way of fulfilling it. His opponent was flying head over heels, with Choi chasing after him. There was a military vehicle below. Kwon gave orders to remain half a kilometer away from the columns until Choi's intentions were determined. He doubted whether Choi had found a way to return the rewards or had simply decided to keep them for himself. Kwon was slow to draw conclusions, realizing that a smart man like Choi could rebuild the city if he wanted to. Even Miss Hyoju, who tried to smooth things over with Choi, was difficult to control. The question of whether the mission would be completed worried Kwon. Suddenly, there was an explosion near the car, which threw it aside. The soldiers got out of the car and saw the dead monster. Choi stood nearby with the legendary sword, Divine Divider, having lost some of his power, but still being able to turn severed parts of monsters into objects. Kwon asked if Choi had really defeated the pillar's defender, but he just looked at him, jumped up and disappeared. Kwon was left puzzled, suspecting that the reason for Choi's silence was due to a sacrifice for sovereignty. However, it appears that Choi had no ill intentions. At this time, the monster began to rise from the ground. The condition for opening the hidden feature was met. The fallen angel has lost its wings and destiny status. A message has appeared about the addition of a new feature: corruption. The defender of the column turned into an evil beast who lost faith and fell into sin, rejected by God. The creature was furious, its huge tongue hanging out of its mouth. Kwon realized with bitterness how harsh the life of a soldier was. The military was approaching. Kwon began shooting, realizing that the three monsters together posed a serious threat, like a full-fledged invasion. He realized that such a monster was left to him to eliminate on his own. After requesting reinforcements over the radio, Kwon prepared for battle. And the battle began. The situation escalated sharply. The military could not withstand the onslaught of the monster and began to panic, screaming in horror. The system registered an abnormal state in them. Fear paralyzed the will to fight, and they began to retreat. Kwon desperately tried to control the situation, screaming and attacking the monster to distract it and get it away from the others. His goal was to hold out until reinforcements arrived. But the monster was too strong. Jumping from behind, it crushed Kwon with its paw. It seemed that everything was over. At that moment, Choi, opening the book, realized that there was one more action that could be crossed out. And suddenly, the monster lit up. Its paw was glowing with white fire. The system activated a special skill, Hilden's Ghost. The conditions of the hidden skill worked. Quan was on the verge of death, and despite the darkness corruption type attack, the skill did not turn off. He was the leader of a group of 5 people. Another condition. At this point, Quan became possessed by the ghost of Hildine, a cultist inquisitor. His equipment, the demon goddess sword, and the fallen goddess iron mace were filled with divine power. His body glowed and his defense against dark corruption increased dramatically. The system has activated the skill Fanatic, which grants unbridled rage to the fallen. The goddess's sword is a weapon of retribution. Now Quan and his team were losing control of themselves. They mercilessly attacked all monsters with the dark corruption type. It was much scarier than he had imagined, Choi thought, as he watched from the sidelines. The battalion commander, Colonel Kim Song, offered Quan a car, but warned him to act on his own. Quan was surprised. It seemed that such privileges were too modest for a simple sergeant. The colonel appreciated Quan's frankness and noted that he liked it when ordinary soldiers spoke directly to their superiors. Kim Seong is a level 1 character with the normal villager class. The commander emphasized the urgency of the situation and the need for a cool head, calmness, and a rational approach in such conditions. Earlier, on the battlefield, Quan gave the command to attack, trying to inspire the soldiers. The soldiers fought, shouting battle cries in the name of the goddess. Their cries kept their spirits up and set them up for victory. Quan waved the flag over the defeated monster, symbolizing triumph and unity. After the battle, the system notified of the victory over the Beast of Corruption, the defender of the first column. And she noted that the greatest contribution was made by the reconnaissance detachment led by Quan. The commander sighed with relief. Experience had not let him down in relation to Quan. Choi watched the system window closely and realized that the monster was so exhausted that it was Sergeant Quan's group that defeated it. Despite the fallen angel's transformation into a beast, his health was not restored due to the corruption, and the system recognized Quan's greatest contribution by awarding him an award. Choi thought that his own merits were not being taken into account because of this. Turning to his opponent, Monster Number 3, he tried to strike up a conversation and proposed a bet. If he wins, he will break the seal of the Demon King. The monster listened with interest. At this moment, Miss Hyoju was fighting the anti-human machine M5ACHM05 at the second column, where crowds of monsters continued to advance, and it seemed to her that there would be no end to it. Over time, the monsters became stronger and more advanced. Their versions improved from 0.1 to 0.4. Miss Hyoju was determined to deal with them before the situation got out of control. But, faced with the advancing threat, she ordered everyone to retreat immediately. The people behind her were indignant. They also needed glasses to survive. One man reminded that he had to earn points to save his family, and would not let them die in vain. A giant monster with a huge brain on legs was approaching. People were hiding behind the rocks. The 2 men held Royal Aran Archers crossbows, a magical class of weapon. Increases attack if there is a lot of Royal Army Aran equipment in the party. The monster's eyes glowed red, and he noticed people. A magical light emanated from his gaze, and it was directed towards them. At the last moment, Miss Hyoju appeared in front of the people and blocked the blow with her spear, saving them. People screamed in fear. There was an explosion, and Hyoju sighed heavily, clearly tired. She ordered them to run away immediately, and the people rushed away. The monster watched her closely. The system began to analyze magic power, body, user level, behavior, and other factors. The analysis was completed. The risk was detected. The main robot has started production of a new monster robot. the anti-Hyoju machine, by speeding up the creation process as much as possible. Hyoju knew she had to stop production, but the monsters were already surrounding her from all sides. They were clearly targeting her. This didn't frighten her. On the contrary, she decided to use it to her advantage. She activated her power, releasing a stream of fire that blew away everyone around her, turning the monsters into burning debris that fell to the ground. She gave the order to retreat so that people could get to a safe place as quickly as possible. People ran. The fire gradually approached the main monster. Suddenly, a bright flash of fiery light blinded everyone, and the wave swept people off their feet. One man screamed in panic that Hyoju could destroy them all. She just laughed, understanding that the world is much more complicated than it seems. A dome appeared around the main monster and the tower, which did not allow her power to pass through. A new robot appeared in front of her, Monster Elite, an anti-Koheiju machine with a maximum difficulty of 2. It was resistant to fire, armed with a dragon slayer, dealt extra damage to Kohoju, and automatically tracked her. Hyoju was shocked when the monster appeared behind her. She managed to turn around, swung her spear, and struck. But then Choi appeared in her field of vision. He jumped on the giant monster with the huge brain and cut off its brain with one powerful blow. Hyoju was confused and screamed what he was doing. Suddenly, her eyes started to close, and a huge explosion was heard. The monster pursuing Hyoju remained standing near the scorched ground, and a blood stain appeared on the ground. The system has detected that the target Heiju is missing, but has detected traces, so the pursuit protocol is active. The main robot was left without a brain. The condition for opening a special ability was met. The system activated the skill Mad Order, which repeated the production of the last created item, but did not affect elite classes. The speed of production doubled, and the number of robots produced increased dramatically. Soon, thousands of identical machines were moving forward. Production will not stop until the main brain that controlled the entire system is destroyed. Choi reflected that the first column had held out longer than expected. Many people hid in fear, and the firepower of the first column was insufficient to break through the defense. The second column required the evacuation of the wounded to avoid further losses. People shouted and drove trucks to rescue the victims. Choi knew that clearing all the columns was easy, but it wouldn't win the game. The city needs to be made stronger, which requires a competent commander and a powerful fighter. Hyoju woke up on the ground, realizing that she was alive. A monster swordsman appeared nearby, causing her to feel terrified. However, he calmly explained that he had healed her wounds and suggested that they begin to act immediately. Despite her surprise, he ignored her questions. The monster recalled Choi's words about meeting a great teacher after her defeat, who would develop her powers. A typical cliché, as he noted. Hyoju took this with a slight smile, realizing that a serious test lay ahead of them. A mechanical fighter hunter hovered above the city's high-rises, scanning the surrounding area with precision. The algorithm detected Hyoju's position. The distance to the target was reduced to 300 meters. The fighter activated the destroy protocol, descended lower, and released a plasma charge. Choi intercepted the car before it could continue its attack, holding its body with one hand and delivering a sharp blow. On Choi's hand glowed the linking Mad Brain, a heroic artifact that disrupted the systems of monster machines. The accessory disarmed the robot and temporarily suppressed its targeting, while simultaneously neutralizing its built-in traps. Choi assessed the scale of the destruction. The enemy's power was suitable for clearing out the targets he needed. The robot, deprived of navigation, was easily controlled. Choi allowed the program to reboot, turning the robot into his weapon. The collapsed tower solved one of the problems. Under the young crescent moon, Hyoju fought the tower guardian. The spear met the sword, and fiery energy flared up. Excessive power could harm her body, so she should only use as much as she could control. The mentor reminded, power belongs only to those who are able to control it, and not vice versa. Hyoju gradually learned to control the flames, punctuating each thrust with a precise, controlled flare. The battle at the tower accelerated again. Hyoju breathed heavily as she recalled the terms of the bet. She had to master techniques sufficient to defeat the robot pursuer. Brief confusion was replaced by determination. Any misunderstanding can be overcome by strengthening the body and honing the skill step by step. The swordsman, seeing her tenacity, changed his mind. She was not Choi's puppet, but a fighter who was forging her own path. Hyoju's response was gratitude and a willingness to train even harder. Moonlight slid across the spear blade, reflecting new understanding. Defeating the machine will require not only strength, but also complete control over every breath, every movement. 3 days later, people hid in the deep underground, tired and hungry, waiting every hour for the endless siege to end. Talk of help was replaced by fear of losing points and failing the mission, so the crowd restrained itself from any action. A distant rumble cut through the silence. The underground tunnel shook, and an explosion echoed throughout the station. A hunting robot emerged from the clouds of dust, its sensors flashing red as it picked up Hyoju's energy signature. The combat modules activated. Plasma pulses struck the vault, showering the platform with concrete chips and shrapnel. Panic gripped the shelter. The survivors rushed to the exits, but the corridors shook under the volleys of high-energy shots. The metal of the walls and columns melted, reflecting a caustic glow. Screams and dull thuds drowned out the rumble of falling floors. The robot's system noted the absence of a target signal, declaring the task complete. The 2 severed megabrains lay on the ground, sparking and flickering with residual energy. The disrupted mind system no longer coordinated its actions. The robot, frozen in the middle of the frightened crowd, detected a signal. Hyoju. Its sensors flickered, and its body turned in the direction of the source. A lone figure emerged through the rubble and dust. The people pressed against the tunnel walls held their breath. The girl approached slowly, but inexorably, a spear in her hand, heat flowing around her. The crowd froze. Someone desperately tried to comprehend what they saw. Before them stood not just a man, an image, as if an angel had come from heaven. The system has recorded the completion of a special event. A new path has been opened to become the apprentice of the swordsman Goblin Jack and inherit his unique fighting style. Along with this discovery, a reward was activated. Equipment of the heroic class and above, as well as the passive skill Disciple of the Master of Fencing. Among the rewards, the armor that stood out was the Illusion Coal, a heroic class armor that once belonged to the best student of the Larni Empire. This armor increased defense proportionally to the amount of fire element equipment worn. On the roof of a high-rise building, looking down at the chaos-ridden city, stood Choi and the swordsman. Choi noticed the women's gear and, squinting skeptically, asked where it came from. The answer was short. From the past. The battle was unfolding below. Fate was hanging by a thread once again. The chances of victory remained exactly 50-50. The metal monster created as her natural enemy still posed a threat. But now she had something she hadn't had before, an understanding of swordsmanship, learned from a true master. If the seed, planted in time, sprouts, then even this metal enemy will not be able to become a rival for her. It all depended on growth, on how quickly she could reach her potential. The activated passive skill Apprentice Swordsman became a key link. It accelerated the development of all melee skills, allowing the student to progress rapidly. This was not just the path of a student. This was the preparation of a warrior who could rewrite the rules of combat. 3 days, 15 hours, and 34 minutes had passed since the mission began when the first column fell. The soldiers, despite their fatigue, continued their advance. 3 days, 17 hours, and 21 minutes later, the defender of the second column fell. A few more hours later, at 21 o'clock on the third day, the special monster Max was defeated. System notifications reported key turns in the battle one after another, and everyone who was still in the ranks read them. On the fourth day, at 00 hours and 3 minutes, Quan stood alone in the empty clearing, watching Hyeju appear on the horizon. Most of the participants who had once dropped out of the race began to return to the game. By 3 hours and 44 minutes on the fourth day, the second column was also destroyed. It was then, for the first time since the beginning of the mission, that people had hope. They began to feel like they could handle this challenge, even without Choi's intervention. These were their thoughts, inspired by unexpected success, while Choi himself sat quietly and read a book. The duties were temporarily postponed. Jack's student had won. This meant that he had fulfilled his promise. The fencer, watching the events unfold, admitted, the student had won, but her journey was just beginning. In response, Choi calmly confirmed that it was now his turn. The soldiers were at the warehouse collecting provisions. One of them was shouting out instructions. Take food while you can. An irritated voice came over the radio. An officer was reproaching his subordinate for taking matters into his own hands. Instead of observing, he suddenly began to give orders like a general. There was a restrained response with an apology. However, the senior officer did not go into the conflict further. He said that the responsibility was now on him, and if he handled it, he would get a promotion. The answer was quiet, almost indifferent. No promotion needed. Inside, Quan felt only longing for his mother. Hyeju approached him and reminded him that it was time to move out. Quan nodded. He asked if she was sure she could handle it, since the path ahead was full of threats. She calmly assured him she had already promised her teacher. As they parted, they agreed that next time they would meet as enemies. It sounded like a line from a story of another genre, and Quan imagined the upcoming fight. He wasn't sure if he could win. Even Hyeju, with her strength, is no match for the monster that is approaching. No matter the outcome, the losses will be enormous. Choi's thoughts returned to what he was planning this time. Hyeju screamed in fear, and Quan stood there in confusion. A huge seal appeared in the sky before them. It was Choi, approaching her, flying through the air. Suddenly, there was an explosion. The demonic seal of the Demon King was destroyed. A system message appeared, which shocked Hyeju and Quan. The mission objective had changed. The plate began to crumble, falling into small pieces and glowing red. A new command appeared on the screen: kill the Demon King. There was also a warning that if the mission was defeated, it would fail. People were screaming in panic about Choi, calling him a psycho and hating him for his actions. Quan thought about what was happening, not expecting Choi to actually take such a risk. The fencer, observing the scene, noted that there were many interesting personalities at this time. He soared into the air and cut everything around with his sharp blade. The harpies fell to the ground. Hyeju and Quan watched this spectacle in surprise. The fencer called it both a gift and a test for the student, advising him to devote time to this until the next time their destinies intertwine. Meanwhile, Choi with an accessory, a fallen angel's halo, a legendary class artifact capable of destroying the user in the demon world and hell. Choi approached the giant monster, thinking that getting here was easier than he expected. He approached him, trying to find out about the Demon King of the sovereignty of Krasen. The monster replied that he had never heard such a name and was surprised that a man had appeared here. Demon King, an elite boss named Ktumbara, is a demon king of power. Taking pleasure in destroying objects with his bare hands, he consumes the flesh and bones of his victims. Choi noted that the Demon Kings seemed to interact with each other in some way. The failure of the first attempt forced him to retreat. It will take more time. The monster, confused, received an apology from Choi for disturbing the lunch break and a warning about the opponent's approach. Feeling humiliated, the monster went on the attack. At that moment, A huge rock moved towards Choi. The fencer watched what was happening in bewilderment as blood flowed around him. Choi, reacting instinctively, dealt a powerful blow to the monster, noticing that this was against the rules. The monster couldn't believe that there was an ordinary person in front of him. He was shocked and angry, turning green. Choi, without losing his composure, tried to calm the situation by raising his hands and insisting that it was all an accident. With a touch of irony, he suggested to the fencer that they change places. But he answered skeptically that the Demon King would hardly agree. Suddenly, the monster struck from behind, and Choi was thrown into the air by a powerful blow to the cheek. He thought that if Goblin Jack fought the Demon King one-on-one, it would activate a hidden event, the fate of the Master Swordsman. In such a fight, there will be a possibility of mutual destruction, where both opponents are ready to die together. If this happens, the rewards will increase significantly, which will greatly benefit the residents and increase their points. However, what happens next remains unknown. The legendary Einherjar combat jacket gradually regained its strength, increasing the wearer's protection. Choi, with his face buried in the rocks, decided to wait until the city had accumulated points from the hunt before finishing off the king, until someone died. The demonic Kutumbara pursued him, each step leaving cracks in the ground. The goblin swordsman watched from afar, assessing the chances of the upcoming duel. In the area, roasted harpies lay on the roads, chaos spread in waves. Quan held the line, shooting at the smaller demons, trying to lead the villagers to safe shelter. The mass of weak monsters did not pose an individual threat, but their numbers threatened to break through the defense. The destruction of the seal made Choi the city's main enemy. The death of any resident increased the hatred towards him. Yeoju soared into the air from the roof of the car, cutting through the dense clouds of angels with her spear, its blade hot as fire. Charred bodies fell onto the road, giving the column of people a chance to slip into the nearest shelter. Complaints could be heard from behind. Without Choi's crazy act, the mission would have already been completed and the rewards received. The girl Kang was amazed by Hyoju's calm, whose heart remained icy amidst the chaos. Level 1, Ordinary Citizen. Hyoju brushed off the hint of a relationship with Choi, and Kang thanked her by throwing a bag of snacks at her. And at the same time, she counted on being escorted to a safe zone. The slight gesture of gratitude resulted in only half a chip, unexpectedly causing slight confusion. On the other flank, Choi was eyeing the blade when Goblin Jack pushed him back. The fleeting thought of a peaceful meeting with Jack somewhere in another world seemed to deal Choi a critical blow to his conscience. But the swordsman had already dissolved into the battle whirlwind. The Demon King closed the distance with a jerk, the thunder of footsteps and roaring anger filling the space. Choi felt guilty and understood that he would not have time to activate the fate of a swordsman. At that moment, the pages of Krasen's book flashed scarlet. Goblin Jack's friendliness level reached its maximum, revealing a hidden effect. Meanwhile, Jack himself, covered in blood and dust, entered into a furious confrontation with the demon. Having recognized the true nature of the enemy, he prepared an absolute technique, a blow where the stake is one's own life in the name of a friend and student. The climax was gathering on the battlefield, and history was freezing at the point of the decisive move. Choi appeared suddenly, the blow turning King Kutumbara into a whirlwind of blood and stone chips. A shocked Goblin Jack felt a surge of power as the system declared the demon's downfall. The notification assured, all summoned monsters crumble into ashes along with their master. Choi's contribution to the victory is recognized as the highest. The talent, Recruitment of the Four Lords, is activated, opening a spirit contract with someone who is loyal or afraid. The first candidate was Jack himself. Invisible seals filled the air, sealing the agreement. Choi felt another step away from human nature. The city has been awarded 800 points. Base reward, challenge to the Demon King, minimum losses, and time to spare. The top three have changed. Kwan, 3,245, Hyoju, 4,543, Choi, 223,245. The crowd greeted the outcome with mixed emotions: relief, envy, and distrust of the new hero. Hyoju watched as Choi, exhausted, left the city. On the roof of a multi-story building, Kan, sitting on the edge of the parapet, smiled, looking at the silhouette of the falling body, trying to decide if he is a salvation or a detonator. Below, among the charred concrete slabs, Kwan, covered in his own blood, reflected on what was happening as a broken strategy. In a game of defending a single base, there was still room for a warrior who could destroy all balance logic. Meanwhile, Choi was free-falling, as if completely detached from earthly concerns, and Krasen's book was spinning nearby. The game's internal infrastructure has detected a critical anomaly. The system panel displayed the following parameters: Level 600, Maximum Characteristics, Normal Resident Class. 4 reaction options: Destroy, Restart, Postpone, Summon, flashed on the screen. An unknown administrator checked the box that meant a complete erase. The system was unable to carry out the transmitted order. Choi continued to fall, no longer as a player or a pawn, but as a glitch that resisted an attempt at erasure. The giant hand selected the Destroy option, and the moment the command was accepted by the system, Choi felt a strange sense of unease. It was as if something beyond reality was watching his every move. His intuition howled. He had already landed, feeling the vibrations of the ground, as if the dull rumble of a hammer had passed beneath him. A failure occurred within the system. Returning to the previous menu was impossible. The error was flashing on all interfaces. The hand, as if possessing a will, furiously pressed on the virtual panels, trying to gain access. In response, the system opened the unit window. In the identification column, the note Hidden was displayed. The unit has been classified as unperceivable by other players. Elimination attempts have been cancelled. The game was forced to resume despite the intervention. At the same time, the world continued to function as usual. Treatment shops reopened, offering standard services. The voice sounded overhead again. A man, using the artifact Voice of the Herald, announced the results of the research of new reward items. The magic class instrument amplified the voice of its owner as much as the mana could carry, spreading the sound for kilometers. He announced the characteristics of the 7 types of reward cubes encountered during missions. Tetrahedral, 1 to 60. Normal class. Hexahedral, 1 to 80. Magic class. Octahedral, 1 to 80. Magic class. 10-sided, 1 to 94. Magic class and Heroic. 12-sided, 1 to 94. Magician, Hero. 20-sided, 1 to 99. Magician, Hero, Legendary. 100-sided, 1 to 100, hasn't appeared since the very first mission. The dice still randomly distributed weapons and tools. 1 to 60 gave a common item, 61 to 80. A magical one, 81 to 94. A heroic one, 95 to 99. A legendary one, and 100 meant a mythical class. Quan looked at the heroic-ranked Fork of Destiny he had received and was convinced that a high class did not guarantee any real benefit. The artifact was simply returned to its owner and always remained clean. Nearby, people exchanged finds. A heavy shield was exchanged for a more convenient knife. Someone was loudly looking for a partner shooter for the next mission, or recruiting volunteers to guard the evacuation center. Kwan's thoughts returned to his recent conversation with Hyeju. She refused to serve in the army and decided to help those who are still hiding out of fear. Her determination to stay by his side during every mission proved that loyalty and support are sometimes more valuable than any legendary blade. Quan watched the busy streets and mentally noted how quickly people adapted to a world where everything was decided by cubes and system alerts. Choi looked out over the city from the roof of the TV tower. The champions are distributed, army units are in position, civilians are organizing exchanges and patrols. The main thing now is to prevent a new internal spark that could destroy the city because of his mistake. At that moment, Kang silently climbed up to Choi. Choi's book revealed that she was only level 5 and classed as a regular resident. But the girl freely climbed high-rise buildings, as if ignoring the danger. She looked at Choi's face with curiosity, checking to see if he was overcome by loneliness. There was a hint of mockery in her words when she called him an idiot who chose the most difficult path to save the city. Smiling, Kang threw the rope down and disappeared below the TV tower station, leaving Choi on the roof, confused. Meanwhile, the system announced the city's experience had reached the threshold, and feature number 8 had risen to level 1 of development, increasing the overall comfort of the residents. Notifications poured in one after another. New functions were unlocked, from interface customization to a full-fledged communication system. Hyojo looked at the smaller window with delight, commenting that it was very cute. The inhabitants began to feel more and more like they were in a game, but in reality, there was nowhere to retreat. Choi was silently looking at the pages of the book at this time. The announcement of the restoration of the infrastructure made everyone happy, but he himself was worried about something else. He had spent a colossal amount of points, but his contribution to the development of the city had not changed. He figured that while other residents' points obviously affected the overall level of the city, his personal spending seemed to be channeled into a completely different system. The idea of the book came up again. It wasn't just a tool, it was probably an independent entity in the system. And it was the book that was eating up the points. Perhaps it is the book that is being strengthened by his resources. The question has become urgency. Is it worth continuing to use it? Quan stood before the assembled company, the shoulder straps of a lieutenant of the 2nd rank glittering on his shoulders. The people around him smiled, clapped, and congratulated him on his promotion. He smiled sheepishly, clearly unused to this kind of attention. It was a moment of recognition, not just of his bravery, but of how far they had all come. High above this bustling courtyard stood Kan, watching the proceedings with cool detachment. Her eyes slid across the stage, as if analyzing every gesture, every emotion. She thought, they were doing really well. Where could she go that would be comfortable? Her lips curled into a slight smile. The bodies of soldiers lay behind them. A rifle lay nearby. One of the fighters was apparently unconscious. The others were breathing heavily. Choi sat in the lotus position, eyes closed, focused on inner peace. Suddenly a notification appeared. A new move had begun. He opened his eyes and saw a message that they had arrived at a cage called the Gold God's Trap. The city had been captured by this mysterious deity, and now it was necessary to quench his thirst for gold within the allotted time. Otherwise, the mission would fail. Gold Thirst was at level 2, and 4 summoning cards were triggered, indicating the difficulty of the task. The mission lasted for 2 whole weeks, which surprised Quan. He was used to being given days, not such long periods. The main goal is to find treasures on the summoned maps and deliver them to the city. The value of the items found was directly dependent on the pleasure of the god of gold, which could be assessed in the city. People were glad that there was enough time and the city was freed from monsters. This gave hope for success. Additionally, if someone else completed the task, everyone would also receive rewards, which was perceived as an added bonus. However, there was no overall reward for the mission. Individual bonuses depend solely on the gold god's satisfaction with each player's actions. People understood that without treasure hunting, there would be no rewards. But many did not even have the appropriate equipment, and this caused indignation and doubt. Too many conditions to be met. Hyoji decided not to delay and went straight away to personally study the mission map. Choi watched her from the rooftop and smiled. Judging by the successful rolls of the dice, their team had every chance of successfully completing the mission and complete the first level of the city development plan. For now, he will continue to use Crayson's book, hoping to find a way to get rid of it soon. Choi opened the book, and suddenly a hand emerged from its pages, stabbing him with a sword. He was overcome with surprise, as if time had stood still for a moment. At this point, the system issued a warning. On the previous mission, the number of sacrifices to sovereignty was 0. Choi's heart sank in sudden pain. The system had declared punishment from the Demon King Crayson for laziness. Choi's condition worsened sharply. He became unbearably painful, and his HP, vital energy or resource, was rapidly decreasing. The warning was that if the sacrifice to sovereignty was not made before the HP reached 0, the user will die, and Crayson's book will choose a new owner. Fate hung on a thin thread, and there was almost no time left for reflection. Sector A, Jungle. An entrance to a forgotten dungeon, not marked on the main schemes, was discovered there. The group of 4 excitedly discussed the find, knowing that the dungeon's spoils would be entirely theirs. They understood that if they reported the army's dungeon, each of them would receive at least 50 points, a considerable bonus for their current levels. However, the question was, should I refuse such a chance or risk keeping the secret and take the reward in full? Among the equipment was the Black Fire Dragon, a one-handed sword of the heroic class that dealt medium fire damage. When used in the right hand, it dealt additional damage, and when paired with the White Ice Dragon's left sword, it gained the large damage attribute. The group called itself Guns and Roses. The leader was Khan Toyop, who had reached the 3rd level. The group consisted of 4 people, a strong team, ready to write their names in the history of the new world. Someone suddenly emerged from the cave, a monster or a gatekeeper. One of the men immediately identified them with a stereotyped certainty. The second one, laughing, noted that for them, this world is just a playground, where they are guild masters and squad leaders. Suddenly Choi came out of the cave. He had a huge bundle of jewels on his back, which surprised those present. People were discussing him. Choi began listing the monster's weaknesses: vulnerability to lightning and the use of poison, so he recommended stocking up on antidotes. They tried to silence him by shouting in frustration and covering their ears. Choi quickly provided tactical information. The building had the word Harltan written on it. There was tension in the camp. People could not believe that they had become victims of sovereignty on the very first day of the mission. One of the men banged on the table and indignantly asked where the justice was, declaring that something had to be done about Choi. Another, more passive one, advised simply to forget the failure and sit quietly, doubting that anyone could handle a max-level player with a mythical weapon. A man came up to them and asked where Choi got them. In the jungle, the guys answered, the man saw Choi in the canyon. Everyone remembered how Choi looked like a devil, showing his true nature and demanding more sacrifices for sovereignty. His face was so frightening that one of them almost wet himself. At first, many wanted to ignore the victims and look for treasures, but they realized that this was only to Choi's advantage and returned to the camp. The general consensus was that Choi could not be allowed to manipulate them as he wished. The system registered 2,452 victims of sovereignty, and the Demon King Crasina became a little satisfied, causing the punishment to become weaker and more bearable. He thought that the Demon King's punishment was not mentioned anywhere in the book's description, and that the book was hiding much more about itself. All of this was within the bounds of expectations. The Demon King seemed to think that he had him under complete control. However, by the end of the mission, Choi was confident that the situation would change and he would be in control. He smiled and decided to give it a try. Sector B, Canyon. This was the nest of the Emperor Griffin, an elite monster with a difficulty level of 3. This fantastic griffin was rumored to have inherited dragon blood, making it especially dangerous. When fighting within your nest, the difficulty level increased by 1. He flew past, his tenacious claws spread out, ready to attack. At this time, Heiju was engaged in a fierce battle with an elite monster, a stone troll. Difficulty 2. This troll was adapted to the harsh life in the canyon. Its skin was like stone, and its blows were devastating. Heiju climbed onto his back, deftly dodging his furious movements, and tried to thrust her spear into his vulnerable spot. She remembered the words of her teacher, "Power is not meant to control. Allow it honor. Allow power to find its own way." With these words in her heart, she concentrated, allowed her body to move instinctively, and the spear found its target accurately. The troll let out a dull roar and collapsed to the ground. Standing over the body of the fallen enemy, she quietly said, "Your student has become a little stronger." Hyoju heard Kang's voice behind her as she lazily and confidently rummaged through the contents of the chest, indifferently assessing the things she had found. She, as always, behaved unceremoniously and arrogantly, as if everything that was happening around her concerned her only insofar as it mattered. Hyoju was surprised to see that she had managed to profit even from this. Kang was completely unashamed of her behavior. Her explanation seemed brazen and ridiculously frank. She was simply following Hyoju because it benefited her. This directness confused Hyoja, who found it impossible to respond to, since Kang seemed to be completely confident in her right to do as she pleased. Then Kan pointed out the direction to go next. With a slightly feigned helplessness, she reminded that leaving a defenseless civilian alone in such a dangerous place would be, to put it mildly, cruel. Hyoju felt irritated, but she couldn't help but admit that despite her impudence, she was skillful at clinging to someone else's strength and getting the most out of the situation. Hyoju stopped and checked the message on her phone, informing her that the coordinates had already been sent. She ordered to take the treasures and share them, while learning that Uncle Vanka would soon be there. Hyoju turned her gaze to Kang and pointed at her modest bag with slight irony, noting that the loot from the entire day of tracking looked quite modest. But Kan just shrugged, noting with a slight grin that she preferred quality over quantity. She added that it was impossible to accurately determine the value of the treasure until it was appraised in the city. So she chooses things that give her an inner feeling, a sense that this is what is real. This answer sounded strange, but it had its own charisma. Hyoju looked at her with interest and noted to herself that, despite her eccentricity, there was something special about Kang. This is what a true spirit should be like. Kang looked at Hyoja and asked about her comrades. Hyoju calmly replied that she had gotten rid of the monsters on the way to this place, not attaching any particular importance to what was happening. However, Kan just shook her head and said that she didn't seem to understand anything at all. Hyoju thought for a moment, unsure of what exactly Kang meant. Then Kang explained that the real threat to this mission wasn't the monsters. The main problem is the very nature of the mission. It is not designed for cooperation. This is not a peaceful treasure hunt. There is currently a hidden war going on, where everyone is for himself, because there are no common rewards. Everything that can be obtained will depend only on personal success and the favor of the god of gold. And this turns the task into a battle of all against all. Until the treasure is appraised by the city, it is considered no one's property, without any right of ownership. Too often this has become a pretext for attack. After all, some may come to a rather obvious idea. It is easier to fight people than monsters, and the reward may be just as valuable. But the path to it is far less dangerous. The police arrived at the crime scene and began recording evidence. There were 2 detectives standing nearby, ordinary residents, one on the 6th level, the other on the 14th. Both looked shocked, not fully understanding what had happened. According to the victim, he lost consciousness at the time of the assessment, and when he came to, the treasure was no longer there. Investigators noted that this is happening more and more often. The assessment system makes the subject vulnerable. It takes time, anywhere from an hour to 12 hours, creating a window in which any sufficiently clever person can commit the theft. In a mission setting where there is no common reward and everyone acts in their own interests, such cases become the norm. Law enforcement officials concluded that the victims were again targeted while under the effect of the assessment, and that the thief had likely left the sector long ago. One of the investigators referred to the banal human desire for easy money, the other to the inadmissibility of such assumptions. One of the police officers noticed Choi, and for a second there was a flicker of alarm in the crowd. Choi himself watched quietly as the senior investigator, having identified him, silenced any potential scandal by placing his hand over his mouth. On the investigator's hand, the Fungbak glove flashed, a legendary relic of the old dynasty, in which the power of the wind god was hidden. These gloves allowed control of air currents, amplifying blows with a thin, directed wave. Their true potential was only revealed if the owner wore all three dynasty relics or was the sole owner of one of them. A blinding flash and a dull thud shattered the crime scene. The police recoiled, some instinctively reaching for their guns. There was a short silence, which was broken by the voice of the investigator giving orders. It was necessary to immediately record the fact of Choi's discovery and organize the evacuation of civilians. The situation was beyond the normal range. He believed that anyone who dared to go against the logic of the system and against a stronger opponent must either die with honor or be recognized as worthy. Choi wasn't acting spontaneously. There was clearly calculation behind his actions. Too much about this situation seemed like part of someone's larger plan. Notifications began to appear on the screen that Choi had been arrested and was in custody, and rumors quickly spread among the people. Someone claimed to have personally seen Choi calmly walk into interrogation without any resistance. This gave rise to speculation that perhaps he was not an enemy at all, but was acting according to a carefully thought-out plan. Many decided not to miss the moment. Active gathering of groups and special detachments for gold searches began. Everyone was trying to get as many points as possible while the main player was temporarily out of the game. Sector A. Jungle. A fight broke out in a small goblin village. Humans and goblins fought each other using a variety of weapons. One of the warriors with a tomahawk, a heroic class axe awarded to the best warrior of the owl tribe, demonstrated his skill in battle. The axe had the ability to return to its owner after being thrown. Huang Min-woo, a level 3 character and an ordinary citizen, fought with particular determination. He and several other companions pursued the fleeing goblins in an unknown direction. Li Wuking, a level 4 character and also a normal villager, wielded a heroic class bow called Elfirin's Pride. This bow was from the elven race from which its owner came. It disappeared along with her. The bow had a slight increase in the speed and power of the projectiles, but if the arrows were created by elves, their speed and power increased. The goblins ran as fast as they could, but their pursuers did not lag behind. Arrows hit them right in the back. One of the hunters complained about the lost enemy and that it was worth using the cannon. The other insisted that in this fantasy world, a bow and arrow was still more convenient. One of the goblins was mocking them, but at that moment, a bullet pierced his head. Sergeant Pack, a level 5 character and a regular citizen, appeared on the battlefield and shot the goblin with a rifle. His clothes, a wanderer's jacket, a magic class, provided minimal protection from heat and cold, and also reduced the likelihood of detection by monsters. Upon seeing the battlefield, he commented that when they returned, they would run around the training ground, hinting at discipline and order. The platoon commanders reported that they had completed their work in the outer region, to which they received confirmation from another soldier. Kwan's group had almost completed the mission. In the center of the pentagram stood the Goblin King and began to threaten. predicting imminent death and destruction. But before he could finish speaking, Quan and the sergeant suddenly appeared in front of him. The man was armed with a burst ring accessory, a magic class item capable of creating powerful magical explosions with a 30-minute recharge time. Their appearance interrupted the king's speech and brought a sharp turn to the situation. The ring on the finger of the man in the outfit, Kim, a level 3 character and commoner, began to glow. Suddenly there was a huge flash of light, which some might call a hoax. They launched an attack at the moment of transformation or summoning, but Quan reminded them that they were soldiers, not anime heroes. The explosion left a huge hole at the site, leaving behind a trail of destruction. The soldier swung his weapon vigorously, repelling the attacks. The second reported that targets had been identified. 18 residents reported missing, most of them wounded, and urgent support was needed. The Army Command Headquarters decided to send reinforcements along with a detachment of the construction battalion. The main task is to turn the goblin camp into an outpost. The conversation turned to Choi. One of the officers asked if there was any information about his plans. Quan replied that he knew nothing, but noted that the most frightening thing about Choi was not only his ability to extract any information from Crayson's book, but also the ability to effectively use and compare it. It is extremely difficult to predict his actions, but Quan is sure of one thing. Choi is not their enemy. The griffin lay on the asphalt near the building, opening its beak and yawning. People around him were talking about him, calling him Choi's little bird. Choi himself enjoyed the delicious meat soup, and one of the investigators noted that even a person with the maximum level can experience hunger. The conversation became more serious as the investigator asked about crimes related to Choi: fraud, robbery, murder. Choi calmly confirmed that he was aware of the charges. The investigator, with 20 years of investigative experience behind him, noted that sometimes a glance is enough to understand a person, and he saw a good guy in Choi. Another suggested that everything that happened was an accident, and recalled the Good Samaritan law, which, although not in effect in Korea, but in theory, it could help avoid punishment if the actions were done with good intentions. The investigator promised to take responsibility and help with the misunderstandings related to Choi. He was silent, and then reminded that he had not come for help. The soup had already run out. At that moment, a policeman burst into the room with news of a new attack, this time involving a heroic class weapon on the part of the perpetrator. Investigators were surprised. Incidents became more frequent, and police forces were clearly insufficient. The police bus arrived at the scene. The investigator noted that the lack of a common reward in the task explains the complete lack of cooperation. Everything was going exactly as it should have, from the very beginning. Chaos and discord were in keeping with the spirit of the new world and new forces. Another spoke sharply about his interlocutor's position, considering it absolutely unacceptable, and called on his colleague to start thinking more adequately. Although the investigator had a poor understanding of the whole otherworldly situation, he reminded them that they remained human and had to do their duty. At that moment, the man in blood begged for help. In front of him stood a man armed with a sword and a chest, a bandit threatening violence. The investigator said he was arresting him for robbery, assault, and attempted murder, warning him that resistance would lead to nothing good. The bandit surrendered, surprised that the police were not there in full force, but they still put him on the bus. The second policeman complained that earthly laws no longer mattered in this world. One of the investigators suggested the idea of joining forces to become the rulers of the city, claiming that with his help it would not be so difficult. Another explained why he keeps the most dangerous man in the city close to him. Some time ago, the assistant would have agreed with this opinion, but now he could not understand the guy's motives. Choi publicly surrendered to the police just one day after the mission began, and it seemed strange. Soon, he felt, they would all have to run. The senior investigator was surprised. Why this? According to the assistant, Choi's arrest opened up a chance for people to start acting independently. The bandit from the bus reminded them that they were about to leave. But they continued. Now the city would surely become a mess. The investigator did not believe that Choi was trying to do this and admitted that he was a good guy. The question was, what would happen next? Because after the mission was over, people would most likely hide from Choi again. At this time, Choi himself was sitting behind bars, reading a book floating in the air. He understood that now all he could do was wait. The system showed the percentage of remaining victims to sovereignty as 0.3 to 92.13%, and the punishment of the Demon King was still in progress. The Demon King demanded more sacrifices and felt growing discontent. The hair from the Monkey King's tail turned out to be a powerful tool of heroic rank. This hair, belonging to a stone monkey who became a god, gave the ability to create the user's alter ego. Choi closed his eyes, and an exact double appeared in front of him. He mentally asked his double to work hard in his absence and to remain uncaught as long as possible. He himself put on an invisibility cloak, a phase shift cloak, a legendary artifact that looks like magic, but is actually a brainchild of science, allowing one to go beyond the material world. The double remained in the cell, and Choi slowly walked out. The policeman impatiently demanded to come out. The looks were tense. Everyone was waiting for his action. The police were on standby, ready for any attack. Choi spoke calmly about the special isolation measures that had been prepared especially for him, and said that he would get some sleep there. The griffin made a short sound while looking forward, then soared into the sky and flew away. The police were confused, not understanding what had happened, and regretted that they had not managed to take a photo. On the griffin's back sat the real Choi, who was looking intently at the system window. He noted to himself that the residents had already begun to act, which meant that the first stage of the mission had been successfully completed. Now it's time to move on to the next step. The treasure list. 4 days after the mission began, the inhabitants were divided into 2 categories. Some went outside to look for treasures. Others stayed inside, controlling the situation in the city. The role could be chosen freely. Some expressed dissatisfaction at being inside rather than outside. Others had already filled their groups. Residents without combat skills earned money by selling their own arrows and other materials found in the jungle. Meanwhile, the mission was going well. An outpost was established in the jungle sector, a former goblin village. At night, a man stood on the balcony. It was Quan. He was thinking about how they managed to build such a large base in 2 days. The new, otherworldly version of people seemed frightening to him. Quan thought that with such power, if everyone united, the mission could be completed without any problems. But the city was in a tense atmosphere. Crimes related to treasures were becoming more common. Fraud, theft, robbery. The police were struggling to cope, but there were not enough resources and people. The army was preparing to intervene, but knew it would not be easy. The commander made it clear that attempts by the army to replace the police in the past had rarely led to good results. Until an official request from the police, they will limit themselves to their duties. And if help is needed, the army will only provide support, without claiming leadership in maintaining order. Quan thought about it, realizing that despite all the changes in the world, people remain the same, with their weaknesses and vices. This thought made him sad and worried about the future. In the night city, a man screamed in pain. While behind him, another man in a suit was discussing what kind of poison could be obtained by mixing 2 components. In the palm of his hand lay a magical pearl, a sphere of mythical rank thrown out by an emoji, a huge snake from Korean myths that sought to become a dragon. This sphere had the ability to grow stronger with each use, allowing the creation and manipulation of a variety of poisons. The man on the floor was writhing in pain, but his tormentor was in no hurry to kill him. The attacker's personal details and level remained unknown, and the aggressor continued to experiment with new poisonous mixtures. The desperate man ready to give up all his treasures, only begged to stop the torture. But in response, he heard that experience is the only real treasure. Suddenly, he cried out in pain again. Investigators discussed the situation with the Chemical, Biological, and Radioactive Threat, CBR. They were perplexed. Is this really HBR? How convenient and dangerous this weapon turned out to be. This place has been talked about before. The surprising thing was that the killer did not touch the treasure. There was a man lying on the floor, still alive, and around him were many corpses. It was not clear whether this was an individual or a group, but the threat was serious. After the threat of the great Demon King Choi disappeared, a new Demon King emerged from the shadows. The investigator shared his thoughts, admitting that Choi was not a bad guy. Although talk of a Demon King seemed absurd, the situation was alarming. The patient had already been taken away by ambulance. The senior investigator understood that a lot of this started because of Choi, and decided that a serious conversation with him was needed. However, the second doubted that Choi would reveal his plans, but he decided to interrogate his entourage, particularly Kwon and Hyeju, to understand Choi's true intentions. Choi caught a cold, which he found odd considering his max level. Flying on the Griffin, he analyzed the state of the system. The satisfaction of the God of Gold was only 6.74%, which wasn't much, considering the current amount of treasure. The Griffin held a large bundle of loot in its claws, and soon they reached the desert sector. Choi estimated that despite their efforts, residents are unlikely to be able to change anything in the area. He threw the bundle of treasures onto the already collected pile of gold, standing on it. It seemed that the most valuable had already been taken by him. Behind Choi appeared his personal god of gold, a baby who required a lot of love and care. The golden baby god was a reminder that even powerful beings need support and attention. Kwon was leaving for the city. He had to tell what he knew about Mr. Choi. The military asked to bring some treats. The car disappeared around the corner. He drove away. The soldiers finally relaxed, had a real celebration with dancing and alcohol, were happy and having fun, as if they had forgotten about all the dangers. But from afar, Sergeant Pak Song-yu was watching them closely. He understood that they couldn't relax for too long because there was a major raid into the dungeon ahead. Kwon, although he left the platoon to unload and have fun, but the sergeant was clearly worried about him. After all, now he was alone, without support. While the soldiers sang and listened to Cap-Pop, the thoughtful deputy platoon commander remained silent, worrying about the future. Jack, a swordsman, helped ease Choi's pain by pricking his pressure points. He could only ease the pain, not stop it. But Choi was grateful for that too. The Griffin in the corner, as if sensing impending trouble, quietly beeped, as if foreseeing it. Jack simply accepted becoming one of the 4 heavenly kings as if he was used to it. There was still so much he wanted to know, but it would be better to ask the question after the situation had stabilized. Now, while Sergeant Kwon is in town, it's time to rob the empty houses in the jungle sector. A military vehicle was racing along the road. Suddenly, Kwon calmly ordered, "Turn the car around. There was an ambush here," and the truck abruptly changed course. The soldier, who did not expect such an order, blinked in confusion, but carried out the command. The civilians continued their attack. They used Mana Potion, a magic class consumable that restores mana, and also a low-quality magic wand allows you to use spells of 1 to 3 circles. They're crazy, Kwon thought, attacking the military. But if they attack back, chaos will break out. He asked the driver to break away, or at least hold out until reinforcements arrived. Crime in the city was even worse than he thought. All the strong people are outside the city, and here there is only police and civilians. The best environment for crime. If a really strong villain were to appear now, the city would instantly become the most dangerous place of all. Arrows rained down on the truck. the body rattling from the impacts. In the rearview mirror, Quan saw a dark figure emerge from the shadows. It moved jerkily, and it was too fast. Elite, Abyssal Lizard Man, Difficulty 3. Demonic energy distorted his scales. Muscles bulged, claws lengthened right before our eyes. In an instant, the monster was receiving blows. Choi flashed, inflicting more and more wounds. Choi fought the Void Lizard Man, and with a swing of his blade caused an explosion that painted the ravine in crimson light. Choi was victorious. That stinging trick was pretty good, he thought. He felt much better. Jack's pinpoint injections reduced the pain and restored some of Choi's fighting ability. The swordsman gently reminded him that overload was dangerous, but Choi was already assessing the monster's trophy carcass. The meat of the Void Lizard Men was considered a magical ingredient, useful in alchemy or cooking. Improper preparation made the product poisonous, which made the catch especially valuable and risky. The aura of the dungeon was like a demon world, where all the creatures were stronger and the king's stats grew. The raid into the underground city of Taklodom was marked by the system as having a difficulty of 2, but the demon's empowerment doubled the danger. Choi realized that Krasen's punishment would also increase since the Demon King was receiving a bonus from the aura. He decided to speed up the cleanup, take enough treasures, and leave this place. Satisfying the god of gold, Choi considered only the easiest way to complete the mission, but the most meager in terms of rewards. His true goal was to win as much as possible, so the strategy required more risk and pace. The chaos happening in the city is just part of his plan to get the best reward. Quan urged the driver to quickly get out of the huge purple trap that was drawing them deeper into the unknown. He remembered the reward for promotion he had received from his commander. Tool Instant Shelter, Heroic Class. Creates a safe zone. Radius 3 meters. Duration depends on the environment. Choi stopped the driver. They would get into an accident if he kept driving like that. The driver didn't have time to object. A man appeared on the hood of the car. On his face was a magical mask, hiding his identity. Quan wanted to talk, but not with a simple servant, but with the leader. This amused the villain. He liked Quan, but he was the leader, and he wasn't going to listen to Quan. He ordered them to obey him and do whatever he said if they didn't want to die. The car started to melt. Corrosive fog, poison. He didn't know what it was, but it had a large radius and was dangerous. In the worst case, it could become a weapon of mass destruction. From now on, they must worry about their survival. Quan promised to surrender, but first the villain had to listen to him. He was supposed to become Quan's willing subordinate. He would say that he was out of his mind and make him more human. The masked man warned he had just crossed the line. The driver was yelling at Quan why he was angry. That psycho. This was necessary to open a gap for reinforcements. The investigator raised his hand, using his power. A stream of air dispersed the poison. A flash of power enveloped the enemy. The mask maker spun in a green vortex of wind and realized that he had lost control of his smoke. The enemy's forces entered into resonance, reducing the effectiveness of his toxins. He grabbed a heroic rank slingshot made from the bones of a giant and fired a projectile, leaving a gaping hole in the asphalt. Quan, assessing the threat, threw the investigator into cover, managing to avoid injury. The soldier in the cabin demanded an immediate retreat, but the policeman insisted on detaining the criminal, fearing more victims. Quan, guided by calculation, emphasized the importance of a tactical retreat. The death of the defenders would only worsen the situation. The driver noticed that the mask-wearer had already disappeared into the night, leaving them without an obvious goal for the argument. Hyeju was approaching. The two guys were scared when they saw her. No quota could help them deal with such opponents. She tried to stop them and offered to talk. They threw a bottle at her. A beer bottle, she wondered. But Uncle Uni screamed, It was poison. If the bottle breaks, everyone will die. She used her spear to throw the bottle into the air and caught it. Uncle expressed relief that Miss Heiju was in town. She wanted to know who it was and what kind of people they were. But Uncle didn't know. There had been a lot of robberies lately, but he had never seen one so organized. Many people have suffered because of the poison. It is a deadly poison that cannot be cured by standard antidotes. He reported that he may have lost the treasure that Miss Heiju gave them. She thought that some people thought that people were easier to deal with than monsters. Hyoju gave orders to Uncle Yuni to stop searching for treasure. He was surprised, but obeyed. There was something ominous in the air, as if the city was surrounded. Choi flips through the Book of Krasen, assessing the coming chaos and the battle to come. Kan watches him from a nearby building, eating chips and pondering his plans. He made such a fake. If Choi is not in the city, then there is no need to be here, Kan thought. Choi was thinking about the upcoming battle in the city. Jack asked if that wasn't Choi's goal. Choi admits he planned to cause chaos, but didn't expect such a crazy opponent. He couldn't just hack the enemy to death. Not everything was ready yet. The swordsman guesses his tactics. Choi needs more instability. He needs more chaos. Their path leads to the deepest area of the dungeon, the Taklodam zone, which they enter through the gate. Choi and the swordsman reached the deepest area of the dungeon and encountered a demon, an elite boss, the king of the abyss, Takloa, difficulty 4, who enjoys the prolonged suffering of mortals. Choi asked him about Krasin in a businesslike manner, causing the demon's displeasure. Choi then charged forward, but the seal that flared up activated a magical barrier that completely negated physical damage and sent Choi flying back. He landed on his feet and instantly realized that he would need magic that could break a high-ranking spell. Takloa, who wielded powerful magic, turned out to be the complete opposite of Kutumbara, a hand-to-hand fighter. And, even more so, Lieutenant Kwan's army, which relies on physical strength. If Lieutenant Kwan had brought his army, they wouldn't have survived even a second. There are too many dangers around. Cursed objects, plague-infected objects, and monsters. He decided to destroy all threats and reduce the difficulty level of the dungeon to the initial one. In his hands, he held the legendary muscle axe, a tool that had reached divine perfection, capable of transforming physical strength into magical strength. For the safety of the residents, he was ready to do everything possible. Suddenly, there was an explosion, accompanied by a blinding flash. Morning came. In the conference room, investigator Soin Seok from the Major Crimes Investigation Department gathered everyone because of Choi. But the situation changed. He reported the appearance of a mad imugi in the city, a serious threat that the police alone cannot cope with. It was proposed to combine the forces of the police, the army, and conscientious citizens to arrest the imugi. Hyoji supported this decision, noting the danger of the opponents. Kwan reflected on the futility of civil strife. Protracted fighting only makes the situation worse. Even if we win, if the mission fails, everyone will die. The participants' confidence in the ongoing battles and in the confrontation with Choi only emphasized the scale of the upcoming tests. The monster heard the call countless times, remembering the cities he had burned following that call and the suffering he had brought to mortals. For a long time, no one could get close to him, let alone hurt him, using only their strength. Choi asked what the demon knew about the Demon King Krasin and the call, which usually meant missions to destroy mortals. The demon noted that they also have different tasks in one call, which can change. Choi wondered if it was even possible to tell such things, but Demon said that it didn't matter anymore. The more a mortal knows with such a book, the sooner he meets death. Choi clarified that he was talking about Krasin, not the book, to which Demon responded with regret that he would not be able to see the evil fate associated with this book. The swordsman interrupted the conversation, calling for them to leave immediately, and noticed that Choi was panicking. The demon noted that now this call was felt less bitterly. Choi resisted, but the swordsman held him back. Suddenly, the light flashed and hit the ground. The griffin flew towards the light. Choi and the swordsman were sitting on its back. Choi replied that he was fine, although he was thinking about the book and the evil fate that followed it. The swordsman offered to gather more information, but Choi refused, believing that knowing about the demon lord associated with Crayson was enough. They decided to focus on the original goal, to change the difficulty level because everything should end in 3 days. At this time, the knight and the guy below were talking about a possible earthquake, not knowing where the vibration was coming from. The swordsman wondered if they could survive these 3 days, thinking about their students. 3 days later, the safe zone was off to the side. A policeman warned to stick to the main road because of the Amugi gang rampaging around. The nurse reported to the doctor about the shortage of potions and antidotes, noting that there were more casualties after the battles between people than during the mission itself. At this time, the investigator and Heiju were fighting with the masked man, who said that even with the legendary items, they would not be able to catch him. The city was in chaos, and treasures remained the only interest of many, who hid and tried to profit from them. The lack of an absolute leader capable of directing these people made the situation even worse, since such a role should belong to the strongest. Choi was the strongest, Aheji claimed. The masked man smirked as Choi made no move, which he believed was proof that he had no confidence in victory. He prepared a gift for Choi. He formed a huge body from the blue mass and moved to attack. The fog was so thick that it blocked shots. The longer the fight lasted, the stronger the enemy's skills became. The speed of his growth forced him to act quickly before it was too late. The monster claimed that, unlike Choi, he could give as many points and items as needed and complete missions with ease. All that was left for everyone to do was listen and say yes without hesitation. The investigator advised not to waste time on nonsense and to look for treasures. But the monster said that this would no longer work. The defenses were broken, a purple glow appeared everywhere, and they were trapped. It will no longer be possible to resist the poison of fire and wind. The monster was going to soak the victim with poison and leave alive those whose screams he liked, already knowing what kind of screams he wanted to hear. The investigator screamed. Blood began to flow from the investigator's mouth. He considered himself the more logical choice, but the masked man objected, wanting something of his own. The investigator grabbed Yuji. Suddenly, all the poison was gone. The swordsman expressed disappointment with his students, stating that they were no match for even a third-rate opponent like this. The masked man noted that Jack, the convoy's protector from the previous mission, was somehow still here. The fencer said that discipline was needed, but the time for it had not yet come, and it would be postponed until next time. Then came the emergency alert. A new god of gold had been discovered, a teenager ready to fight for a place in the group. His existence will be revealed to the inhabitants when he reaches adolescence. The quest has been updated. You can now choose which gold god to donate treasures to. At the end of the quest, the gold god who receives the most donations will win. Residents who bring offerings to the winner will receive incredible rewards, while those who donate to the loser will receive nothing. City. God of Gold showed the value of donations was 185,332 and 34,773 participants. The results of the second one seemed familiar to Quan. Desert God of Gold is a teenager with 38,552,895 in donations and 1 member. It was definitely Choi. The masked man was cursing, calling Choi a dirty bastard who was hiding for a reason. Creating a villain who would unite the entire city was an obvious and workable approach, but he couldn't trust that role to someone who suffered from protagonist syndrome and acted like one. Relying solely on his legendary items, Choi said. Choi failed to surrender to the police. Physiognomy showed that he had a villainous face. People were going to return to the city. They were told that there were emoji there, and the chances were slim. And if they do nothing, they will lose to Choi again. It makes little difference between the emoji and that bastard. The masked man noticed the griffin in the sky and enveloped Choi in magic. Heji screamed. The investigator was surprised. Choi had become a tool for the man in the mask. The poison specifically created against Choi didn't work because the griffin is resistant to boss poisons. The griffin swallowed the poison whole. The imperial griffin mainly hunts extremely poisonous creatures such as basilisks and hydras. The poison didn't work. Choi gave him homework to figure it out. Instead of bullying people, a flash of light illuminated everyone. Choi landed with the griffin, a swordsman standing next to him. Choi claimed a monopoly on the desert god of gold and promised to make sacrifices to the sovereignty of those who sacrificed to him. The others took this with irritation. Choi smiled, urging them to put in the effort to complete the missions. Choi and swordsman mounted their griffins and flew away. Laughter could be heard in the distance. Hyoji and the investigators watched them go. Hyoji said Choi's name. Kwan adjusted his mask. The investigator was thinking about the little brat. All three thought he was overacting. Hyeju called an emergency meeting of the military and police to search for the treasure. It was necessary to collect more donations for the god than Choi's gold within a week. The investigator admitted that Choi was a great disaster, but that it was impossible to remain inactive. The way to fight is teamwork, a time-tested method of humanity. Hyeju called on everyone to unite to overcome the disaster and find a way home. People raised their hands in agreement. Behind the bars, there was a guy with a seal on his palm. It was a man in a mask. The Mission 1 execution guide has been handed over to the city alliances. The first was that the nest was an area where hostile organisms and ground monsters were present near the base. It was easy to target enemies as their powers became visible to the naked eye. The value of the treasures was not high, but sometimes someone managed to hit the jackpot. 2. The term dungeon covered buildings, caves, and underground structures that could not be fully explored without special means, despite their overall value. The treasures were varied, although due to the high danger, solo forays were prohibited. Military personnel and experienced foreigners were encouraged to unite. Uncle Uni urged us to hurry up with loading and leaving. The 4 trucks moved in a row while the harpies watched from the sky. People vigorously defended the treasures to prevent them from being stolen. The harpies descended, preparing to intercept their prey, but the guards continued to fire, opening a passage for the machines. The trucks pulled onto the asphalt and headed to Treasure Evaluation Center 3, the place where valuable finds were checked and stored. The army, police, and private security were on duty in the center, ensuring safety. During the assessment, a legendary treasure was discovered, an idol of the true god, worth 1,000 units of value. Although the idol itself had no special powers, it was a coveted prize for many, causing envy in those around it. Despite successful operations in the jungle and plains, where the territory was almost completely cleared, the commander-in-chief realized that the desert remained the last untraveled area where Choi was located. The map showed many nests and dungeons, but the desert remained the most dangerous area. The trip there was postponed due to the high level of risk. The commander wondered whether they had enough equipment and resources to cross the desert, and whether it was worth leaving the city undefended for that period. Weighing the pros and cons, he knew he had a tough decision to make. The commander felt they now had a real chance. The hair lying on the table was proof that this was indeed the man, the arrested Choi. The investigator understood that they had been completely fooled. If the existence of the desert god of gold were revealed right away, people would not even move, too afraid of Choi. Choi used himself as bait to get people to take action, and then made them angry to displace their fear. Because of this cunning tactic, no matter the outcome of the mission, Choi will only become further removed from the city. The irritated investigator broke the table. Another realized that Choi wasn't just playing by known cards, but was keeping the entire game in mind, preparing plans for all possible scenarios. To counter him, you need more than just an army and a treasure hunt. You need a more thoughtful and powerful strategy that can outpace his plans. At this time, Kan was in the jungle and stood near an ancient stone. Its surface depicted scenes of worship of the god of gold, as well as brutal scenes of murder, where people chopped him up with axes. She realized that such an artifact could be sold for a very high price. The final day of the treasure hunt turned the desert into the arena of a decisive confrontation. The investigator approached Choi right at the altar of the teenage god of gold. The value of the donations exceeded 38 million. But behind all this, there was only one donor. He used a powerful glove strike to send Choi flying, showing that the super level does not negate the laws of mass. Hyoju entered the battle. The city altar had 1 million less donations, but thousands of citizens stood behind them. The masked man joined the battle, his purple magic cutting through the sandy haze, trying to even the odds. There were just over 24 minutes left on the timer, and each hit counted in 2 ways: in the deity's points and in the opponent's wounds. Choi, controlling the space, only urged his opponents on, calling on them to expend more energy. The City Alliance gathered together to resist Choi's power. 4 days ago, Hyoji was shocked to learn that Imyuj, who the city considered a dangerous leader, he turned out to be just a schoolboy, Kang Sang-won, an ordinary resident, level 24. He sat there, slumped, looking indifferent, and waved her away with an irritated wave of his hand, throwing out a remark in the style of teenage bravado. But Hyoji didn't back down. She was assigned to watch over him after his defeat, and she took it as a personal mission. He threatened, grinning as he reminded her that he could finish her off before she could activate her defenses. Hyoji didn't flinch. She knew his weakness. Despite his influence, physically, he remained an ordinary person. His self-confidence was based on his knowledge of human nature. He did not consider his former subordinates to be traitors. They were just weaklings who, in his opinion, would come crawling back to him at the slightest hint of strength. Hyoji watched him silently, with growing disgust. She saw not a threat, but the fragile shell of a young cynic clinging to an image he himself did not fully believe in. Hyoju noted that the Imugi student's self-confidence was fueled by a mythical pearl that had not yet reached its full power. While the artifact is developing, the young leader remains vulnerable and therefore believes that he will eventually subjugate the city if no one interferes. Hyeju wondered whether she should even let him live. Meanwhile, at the Treasure 4 Assessment Center, the group that returned from the dungeon reported their first successful medium difficulty clear. This inspired a move to more dangerous routes, and Kan, who appeared on the site. The police have stepped up their control. An attempt to carry a weapon without permission inside the city was recorded. Officers issued a fine and reminded of the rules. The city was changing rapidly. Khan knew that the days of unrest, when the value of information skyrocketed, were over. Now it has become more difficult to sell information. People have started working together. In such conditions, the most important thing is not knowledge, but connections. The phone rang. The name of the subscriber appeared on the screen under the name Bribe. Kan knew who it was. The conversation confirmed her expectations. It was Hyoji on the other end. The words sounded worried, but Kang responded with a detached tone. In reality, she just wanted her to introduce her to influential people to whom she could profitably sell the information. And that's exactly what happened. Hyoji led her to the city's leading figures. The meeting was held in a crowded room. Everyone was present. Before the discussion began, Kwan raised the question of the presence of the Imugi. The answer was affirmative. The student felt confident. The commander confirmed that it was he who invited him, emphasizing that the Imugi were the most important force at their disposal. Using Hyoju merely as a guard seemed impractical. It was time to use all available resources. The investigator, looking at Imugi, could hardly contain his irritation, but was forced to give in to the general decision. The policeman offered to listen to everyone. It was one of the elders, Ali Chulman, Level 1, Class Ordinary Resident. Kan revealed the information she had collected. They hunched over drawings found in the jungle, depictions of an ancient ritual in which people worshipped a god of gold, and then brutally destroyed it. The information brought by Khan aroused both alarm and interest. The commander assessed the data. The meaning was clear. If the drawings were true, they had a chance to kill the gold god before he completed his maturation. This meant that Choi was not yet invincible. However, the path to it lay through the most dangerous part of the desert, and Choi stood in that path. The commander understood that it would be almost impossible to get past him, but there was still a chance. He repeated his decision. It was worth a try. That was why he remembered Imugi. To use it, despite its reputation, despite the risk. Imugi himself nodded with satisfaction upon hearing this. He knew that the city would eventually turn to him again. The deal was made. Choi and Swordsman sat on the roof of a ruined building, watching the horizon. The swordsman asked if it was time to begin the next wave of sacrifices for sovereignty. Choi considered. This time, he said, he chose as victims those who had chosen a path beyond their capabilities. Explorers who rushed into the dungeons without preparation, people who came close to cursed treasures, and those whose influence or intentions should have been isolated in advance. Everything was calculated, every choice, every sacrifice. It was necessary before the start of the final stage. The swordsman paused for a moment, catching movement in the distance. A truck was approaching them. Inside were Heiji, the investigator, and the Imugi. Kwan was driving. As he approached, he gave a short order for everyone to prepare for battle. The response from the military side was not long in coming. They were ready. The swordsman only chuckled. Choi confirmed this with one short, almost indifferent word. Not yet the time. He looked at the approaching ones as if they were another inevitable part of the plan. Since ancient times, it has been the custom to send the weakest into battle first. An approach as old as the world, and yet still effective. The schoolboy concentrated his magical power and directed it at Heiju and the investigator, after which he pushed them out of the car with a sharp movement. He called them his bait. In the sky above them, a griffin was approaching rapidly, huge and menacing. Heiju screamed in disbelief, and the investigator cursed in rage, realizing the betrayal. Kwan's shout made everyone act. They had to leave the transport and find shelter. A shootout broke out. Bullets, arrows, the air hummed with tension. The schoolboy, hiding behind a concrete wall, watched the events with a wry smile. He was not going to interfere right now. He was just using the others, both those who thought they were allies and those who thought they were in control. In reality, everything was going according to his plan. The commander looked through binoculars at the desert. Negotiations were planned, but Choi clearly had no intention of making peace. Explosions and flashes of magic could be seen in the distance. He got into the car and prepared to leave. The plan to destroy the god of gold was a hoax. If it had succeeded, the mission would have been won, but the chances of success were slim. The main goal is to collect as much treasure as possible in one trip through the desert. This is the last sector. To do this, they sent the maximum number of people. The Imugi could not be left in a weakened city, so they were deceived. The plan to destroy the god of gold was just a cover to remove them from the city. The trucks stopped. The commander arrived that this was the last sector, the same desert in which the city from Earth unexpectedly appeared. He looked around carefully. He suspected that they were far from the only ones who had been called into this game, although he had no proof. The destruction of humanity did not occur because of external enemies, but because of the internal division and isolation of people who destroyed themselves in the struggle with each other. The bodies had been lying around for at least a year. He paid attention to the treasures. For them, the mission lasted for years, while for them, it was only a few weeks. If this is the case, then despite the game starting at the same time, there may be significant differences in the timeframes of different cities. So far, this remains only a hypothesis, but if it is true, it means that the creators of the game are beings who are able to control time at their own discretion. The griffin hovered over the battlefield. The investigator delivered a series of blows, using a combination. His eyes lit up with a bright light. Hyoju, riding on the griffin's back, used her spear with precision. Choi and swordsman watched from afar. She dealt the griffin a fatal blow, and a flash of fire eclipsed everything around. Fang of Prominence and Funkbuck's glove are two legendary items. Not only do they have enormous attack power, but they also give the owner additional statistics, making even beginners superhuman. However, due to the scale of the attacks, managing them requires teamwork. Quan confirmed that everything was going according to plan, and the military prepared transport, calling on experienced fighters who knew how to work in a team. The griffin, who was lying charred on the ground, managed to get up, which stunned the investigator and Hyoja. Choi walked up to the griffin, congratulating him on the first stage. The investigator stated that he had not come for the god of gold, but to save him, warning that he had not yet completely moved away from the city. "If that's the case," Choi replied, "then you'll have to arrest me if you have the strength." Choi disappeared, jumping off the ground, causing the investigator to be surprised. At that moment, Hyoju was lit with magical fire, preparing for new events. She stopped the magical power directed at them. The fencer noted that the only one who responded was an inexperienced student, and I thought that I needed to be careful not to accidentally kill anyone. Quan thought about the master swordsman, the pillar guardian from the last mission, and a boss with a much higher difficulty than the other guardians. To catch such a defender, hundreds of people would have to attack within half a day. The question arose whether they would be able to defeat a monster that was many times stronger and also had a large number of subordinates, especially without the Imugi. In the gorge, in the nest of the Imperial Griffin, lay an exhausted griffin, with Choi standing next to him. Choi thanked him for his good work and said that the griffin could now rest in peace. Because of his regenerative abilities, he will recover quickly. Choi apologized for using him like that, but not entirely. He used a legendary weather-changing tool that could change the climate of a small region. The duration of the effect depended on the user's rank. The type of weather could be selected, and the tool itself could only be used once. Choi promised to protect his nest until the mission was completed. He remembered the investigator's words that he had come to save him. The strongest representative of the city, Officer So, was expected, but it was surprising to hear exactly these words. Even if he could predict some events, it is difficult to say the same about feelings. The swordsman was shouting from the ruins, causing discontent, and below him were the investigator and Hyoji. He was sure that was all they could do. The soldiers were defeated. Quan lay unconscious on the sand. The investigator admitted that the enemy was simply a monster. Hyoji asked to be allowed to pass, but the swordsman demanded a combat proof of strength, offering to use martial arts. Quan rose from the sand and suggested retreat, reminding them that they still had a few days and that it was not in the enemy's interests to kill them, so they should take their time and develop a plan. The swordsman was left alone, standing tall on the ruins. Choi came up behind him and noted that it was over quicker than he expected. The swordsman praised Quan's prudence, comparing his mind to that of a general, as opposed to martial artists who act impulsively. He stressed that a raid is not a matter for one or two people, but a team effort with a well-thought-out strategy. Success requires practice and sharing of experience among several groups to avoid a monopoly of power. The swordsman asked what happened to Imuj, and Choi replied that he was looking after him, explaining his behavior as a result of adolescence. At this time, Schoolboy thought of Choi as a light breeze, but he believed that if he defeated him, he would be able to kill the god of gold, while the others were busy with Choi. At this time in the city, the assistant investigator was watching the guy, who was surprised at the success of his plan. He explained that Choi was not following the main quest exactly, but rather was using the mission to increase the reward. Based on this, he tried to think like Choi, rather than just bring treasures. He organized workers to inlay objects with precious stones, sew clothes, and sharpen swords, increasing the value of the treasures before they were presented. The question remained whether this method would be able to jump over Choi or whether the expedition team would still be successful. Perhaps this approach, thoughtful and unconventional, will become the way for civilians to win, which Choi himself has not yet thought about. The first type of treasures were ordered to be moved to Zone B and the jewelry to Zone D. There are not enough people to work with metal, so you need to be careful. Hero rank items and above cannot be repaired, so you need to find someone who has these items. A sandstorm was raging in the desert areas, so the treasures will not arrive until night. To reduce the time it took to get to the city, it was decided to install lanterns in the canyon. The police and military agreed with Henim, but they couldn't explain why they named him that way. It just happened that way. He wasn't a gangster boss. The investigator turned around and noted that since Dusik remained in the city, it meant that he had to deal with the situation. Heoji agreed, so noted that Dusik was strong and resourceful. It was this resourcefulness that made him dangerous. He wondered if he should be left alone in the city. He was dangerous, but he admitted that there was nothing he could do about it as usual. Meanwhile, the investigator ate noodles without blinking, but all his thoughts were focused on analyzing the situation in order. The masked man suddenly screamed and flew back. Finding himself in the desert among the ruins, he noticed that his Pearl's abilities had stopped developing. Previously, it became stronger with each use, but now the progress has stopped. The book opened and hung in the air, remaining motionless. Choi knew that the Pearl's abilities would not improve if he only hunted weak opponents, low-level mobs. The schoolboy always avoided strong enemies, preferring to hide and fight low-level monsters or people. Its poison didn't even work on elite-ranked monsters, which cast doubt on the Pearl's effectiveness. Choi knew that if he fought Hyeju, his powers could increase significantly, but he had no intention of telling him that. Content with his independence as a villain. In the desert, the swordsman descended to the ground, attracting the attention of the military, who immediately began to prepare for battle. Kwon, bending down, gave the command to attack. The investigator used the power of the wind. The military was agitated. He unblocked their vision, the military distracted him, and opened fire. Everyone braced themselves for the impact and hid in shelters. There was an explosion. Heiju suddenly appeared from the fog. Jack praised the work done, but stated that it still did not compare to his skills. Kwon believed that they still lacked firepower. The swordsman grabbed Heija by the throat in displeasure, but then released her, noting her progress and the fighting style she had already mastered. Jack acknowledged that teamwork is important, especially when strength is lacking, and Heiju promised to study further. If she was his student, she had to be able to stand her ground. Kwon saw different genres in this. They left. Kwon realized that the swordsman was training them, testing their strength, and thought about the consequences of a possible failure. In the battle conditions, it was difficult to detect Choi and Imugi, which alerted everyone and required maximum vigilance. Heiju tried to maintain her fighting spirit, but the investigator still thought about the realism of the situation and the upcoming tests. The investigator suddenly felt confident that his plan would work. Hyeju was surprised and asked what he was talking about. The investigator raised his hand, and green wind magic erupted from it. Hyeju was amazed. He controlled the element of wind. Kwon explained that Fangbok is a wind weapon and its power is capable of creating such impressive effects. Choi laughed, finding it impossible to achieve such results with only the Funk Buck gloves. He admitted that Officer So had earned the approval of the legendary Fan Buck. Choi, surprised, noted that this happened sooner than he expected. Choi suggested moving on to the final stage. To move, a heroic ticket is used, which teleports citizens to any previously visited location, and allows you to forcibly transfer others if their level does not exceed the owner's level. After activation, all three of them, the investigator, Hyoju, and the masked student, found themselves far from the desert. The schoolboy noticed that So and Heiji's auras had changed noticeably in one day. The schoolboy was surprised, thinking that Choi's power had teleported them to protect his gold god. Choi himself appeared on the new stage and confirmed, "This is the traditional battlefield, the last boss for the final confrontation." The schoolboy immediately went on the attack, confident that by killing his opponents he had improved his own techniques and was now ready for the decisive battle. He believed that playing with these losers helped him realize that the more he hit, the better people acted, and became even better. Choi noted that he was faced with a true villain who was ready to test his strength to the end. Kwan reported that he had lost contact with Hyoju and concluded that she was probably currently involved in a fight. The military is running low on resources, ammunition, and supplies. But despite this, the plan to withdraw the Amugi from the city worked. However, they still have no confidence in victory based on the number of treasures collected. The command decided not to retreat, despite exhaustion. There was too little time and energy to restructure strategy. A reconnaissance team is sent to find out Hyoju's location and the situation in the surrounding area. There are only 2 days left. We need to finish what we started. Meanwhile, Choi prepares for the finale. He calmly says, "So, it's time for the cliched final boss scene," and urges everyone to stay vigilant. Everything is moving towards the climax. The God of Gold had high endurance, but almost no combat skills. With enough skill, he could be defeated in just a second. Choi made it clear that whoever could land a hit on him even once would be given the opportunity to enter where the God of Gold was hiding. He laughed, enjoying the situation. Hyoju thought that his already questionable acting had become even worse than before. The schoolboy, on the contrary, was pleased with himself. He was happy with what was happening, and he thought that everything was going well for him. The schoolboy had just started the fight and clearly had no intention of stopping. However, Choi wasted no time attacking from the air with his sword in hand. The blow landed right on the forehead, instantly, sharply, precisely. The schoolboy screamed in pain, cursing what was happening, but it was clear that he had learned nothing. The investigator and Hyoju watched this, mentally noting how predictable everything that was happening was. Choi's strike was perfectly symmetrical, as if measured. He turned to them, asking if they would just watch. Without words, with full concentration, they activated their abilities. Now they were going to show what they were really capable of. At this time in the city, the police car was finally sealed, ready for dispatch. The uncle looked at the commander with concern and asked if he would be okay. The commander answered briefly, "There are too many treasures, and not everyone will be able to go with them." Kan, sitting in the front seat, all in gold. He ordered to take the guards and civilians and immediately go to the city. The boy agreed to stay with the volunteers and return later with the rest. They suggested leaving the treasures temporarily and focusing on the evacuation so that we could gain some time. The commander was silent. From a distance, the city looked exhausted. Smoke rose high into the sky. Debris and destruction reminded of the recent battle. He gazed silently into the distance, assessing how much the picture had changed in such a short time. The investigator and Hyeju continued to fight, when suddenly the investigator felt a powerful blow. Fast and accurate, as if from nowhere. Choi, watching the fight, reminded him that he could not be defeated with such techniques. He emphasized that he was much stronger than Jack, and that his movements in the air could not be tracked due to special boots. The investigator angrily compared him to a dragonfly, just as elusive and fast. Hyeju, watching what was happening, realized that Choi wasn't even fighting seriously. She remembered the master's instructions, gathering herself internally. Her voice sounded confident. She was obliged to fight with dignity, even with someone who was stronger. She encouraged herself by repeating her name and calling herself to action. At this time, communication with Junior Lieutenant Quan was suddenly restored. Hyeju apologized for her silence. She was interrupted. He hung up. Quant confirmed that everything was fine. He had determined their location. However, she couldn't continue the conversation. Remembering Choi's words about the God of Gold, she received an urgent message from Quanta. "I'll call you back. Just listen." He explained that anything Choi said about the God of Gold was most likely part of a plan. If Hyeju heard them, it could draw her into his sovereignty. From now on, she is a potential target. The schoolboy lying on the sand muttered a threat with hatred. He would kill Choi. Quant warned he would explain everything later. But now they needed to buy time. Hyeju agreed. She would think of something. The main thing was to hold on and continue the fight. Meanwhile, Choi hovered in the air, observing the situation. His intentions were not entirely clear, and Hyeju, despite everything, decided that she would fight to the end, even if everything seemed hopeless. Evening fell on the desert. The schoolboy felt a heaviness in his head and slowly looked around. Nearby on the sand lay Hyeju and the investigators. They were quickly and easily defeated. And they are also a legendary rating. The schoolboy was surprised. Choi sat nearby, carefully studying the book about the morning magic pearl. He understood that its power could consume its owner if used thoughtlessly. The schoolboy doubted it. The mask appeared again, and Choi raised his sword. Hyeju began to breathe harder, coming to her senses. At that moment, Kwan's voice came over the radio, demanding a brief explanation of the plan. It was night. City of the God of Gold. Treasure value: 15,991,370. Population: 97,741. The commander was informed that a column of trucks had reached the city. The vehicles were approaching, raising dust. Uncle Uni, standing in the cabin, waved his hand. The investigator shook hands with the commander, a sign of agreement and the beginning of the final stage. The city of the Gold God reflected new figures. The value of treasures reached 26,891,366. The population was 116,554. Meanwhile, a powerful explosion was heard in the desert. The numbers have changed. The treasure value has jumped to 38,552,895. The population is only 1. Choi continued to fight with Hyeju. The figures changed again. Now the value of the city's treasures was 37,001,970, and the population was 156,342. The situation was becoming increasingly tense. The investigator thought irritably that everything was starting to get on his nerves. The schoolboy consoled himself with the thought that he would be able to earn points and perhaps get a promotion. The signal worked. The remaining time appeared on the screen: 21 minutes, 32 seconds. The investigator concentrated and looked ahead. He gave the order to Hyeju to prepare and went on the offensive himself. The final push began. He screamed as he attacked Choi. A blue hurricane swirled in the air, the result of the use of force. Choi was impressed and did not hide his admiration. He felt the effect of the acupuncture point weakening, and it was becoming more difficult to control the power. Despite this, he commented on what was happening with admiration. The schoolboy shouted that the last blow was his, but someone suddenly rushed past, leaving him bewildered. The soldier raised his hand with a flare pistol and fired into the sky. A red flame shot up. He screamed, drowning out the roar of the wind and engines. At this time, the investigator was already rushing forward towards the ship. The team received an order. Retreat. We need to leave, quickly. The soldier immediately confirmed and began regrouping. The schoolboy, watching the retreating man, clenched his teeth. He shouted, demanding that he stop. He strained his strength and released a pulse. An invisible wave rushed forward, grabbing onto the sand ship. The sand transport accelerated, raising a whirlwind of dust behind it. A silhouette flickered in the distance. There were 15 minutes and 3 seconds left. The sword cut through the magical energy, dispersing it. Choi watched the events unfold with arrogant calm, not believing that this was all his opponents were capable of. Hyoji stepped forward, holding a stamina potion in her hand. She wasn't going to just stop Choi. Her memory flashed back to the first mission where Choi himself had revealed the spear technique to her, a method that required absolute endurance. To use it, you had to pass through your own body, overcome the limit, pierce yourself with a spear. Hyoji raised her sword. Choi realized what she was going to do. He suddenly tensed up, realizing her intention. Her body is not ready yet, and trying to use the technique now could be fatal. Hyoji didn't hesitate. The sword came down, piercing the body. The spear technique is an ancient and dangerous power that can only awaken in a body that can withstand its blazing fury. A spear imbued with the breath of a dragon does not forgive weakness. Only those with great potential can withstand its full development. That is why the technique is known by another name, the Dragon of the Sun. Like the dragon, like the sun, it leaves behind only ashes. Choi looked at Hyoji and asked if she knew about it, about inner strength. Hyoji confirmed that the technique cannot be used without high endurance. The idea was suggested by Junior Lieutenant Kwan. It was he who realized that even if it was impossible to predict Choi's moves, one could try to understand the actions of the person behind them. Choi managed to stop the sword at the last moment. He thought about it. The plan was cunning, and the miscalculation was obvious. He had to admit, this time they had outsmarted him. He shrugged and admitted defeat. His goals here were achieved, and further on, it doesn't matter whether they can catch up with him. With 7 minutes and 23 seconds remaining, Kwan shouted, warning everyone that the ship was approaching. The sand ship rushed forward, cutting through the desert at high speed. The investigators saw magical energy thickening ahead, and instantly realized that it was the Imugi. The pursuit began. The huge figure of the monster followed them, raising whirlwinds of sand behind it. Kwan sighed heavily. There were only 6 minutes and 11 seconds left. The schoolboy didn't play anymore. He finished the game. He held something dangerous in his arms. A baby. The god of gold. His eyes were sparkling, and his voice was different. Not playful, but cold. He demanded that everyone leave, because now he was entering the fight in earnest. Kwan gave the order to attack. The countdown was ticking. There were 4 minutes, 42 seconds left in the mission. Everyone had written off, and the city was making final preparations. The master had finished assembling the armor intended to deliver the offering to the god of gold. At that very moment, Kwan pulled the pin from the grenade and threw it straight at the golden baby. The entire squad focused on trying to destroy the deity before time ran out. The system reacted instantly. The god of gold rejected the offered artifact. The people fell to their knees in confusion. Meanwhile, behind them, a child was making a shabby figure out of mud and precious shards. He was upset by the failure, but the craft suddenly burst into flames and glowed. The improvised treasure was accepted. The timer showed 1 minute 35 seconds. Choi quietly approached Hyeju, asking for a favor. Humanity would inevitably split into groups and start a new fight. It was human nature, and he was prepared for the consequences. The timer continued to count down the seconds, 25 seconds until the end of the mission. The God of Gold was still not satisfied. At this time, Uncle Wee was frantically putting away the last boxes, trying to finish everything before the deadline. The investigator quickly recounted the contents. Time was running out. 11 seconds remained. The tension grew. The God of Gold became increasingly angry. People were hastily finishing their preparations. Some were setting up weapons. Others were laying out carpets, trying to please the deity. At the 4-second mark, Can watched the action from above, lazily eating chips. 2 seconds. The God of Gold was still burning with anger. 0. And suddenly, the God of Gold smiled. The system announcement rang out. Mission accomplished. The city of the God of Gold has won. The schoolboy, standing on the body of the dead infant deity, laughed joyfully. Everything worked out. The schoolboy was happy, thinking about the promotion he had received, but then a message appeared. Due to the victims of sovereignty, all awards were confiscated. The announcement announced the forced relocation of the citizens of the Golden City living outside its borders, and all of them ended up inside the city. Quan praised the investigator for his excellent work, shaking his hand, to which the investigator suggested they have a drink together sometime. The announcement stated that the reward points would be awarded at double the amount, which made Hyoji happy. However, looking around, she noticed that she couldn't find Choi among the others. The next announcement announced the results of the points ranking. Third place went to Kan with 33,442 points. Second to Sun with 45,455. And the first one is Uncle Wee with 324,432 points. People began to shout joyfully, throwing Uncle Wee up in their arms, and he modestly justified himself by saying that it was all thanks to Hyoji. Despite this, the atmosphere was filled with joy and delight. Everyone congratulated the boss and welcomed the victory. Quan received a system alert for the members of his platoon who had captured the God of Gold. They were awarded a special prize, a 12-sided coin, which significantly increases the chance of gaining hero status. The points for the mission were doubled, and the reward itself turned out to be quite generous, which even seemed incredible to Quan. The God of Gold blessed the city, and following this, the export figures increased by 10%. Satisfied, the God of Gold left the city. The time until the next mission was announced, almost a day. Choi thought that everything ended well, because everything could have gone much worse. A message appeared in the system that the Demon King's punishment had been lifted, but the remaining endurance was only 10.4%, which was not enough. The swordsman reminded him that Choi was still the city's enemy, but Choi replied that he was no longer just an enemy, but a disaster, and one that was devastating to the entire city. He laughed at the situation, noting that it sounded really cool and it was amazing how they came up with all this. Nothing special happened, and people continued to rejoice. The swordsman called the disaster status dubious. Choi quietly expressed his joy for the city's development, but the swordsman did not listen. Choi noted that the city now has enough resources to change beyond recognition during the intermission, the period between two missions. On the streets, people chanted loudly, expressing their desire to work for their uncle's delivery service and dreaming of becoming delivery kings. Uncle Ui tried to explain that it was all thanks to Hyeju, and they only helped a little, but that's why they wanted to join. The crowd enthusiastically praised Hyoja, calling her a true hero, an angel of flame, and an idol of the 8th city. Noting that she continued to fight to the end despite captivity and the influence of sovereignty, many were ready to give their lives for her. Uncle tried to hold back the crowd while Hyoju watched from a parallel building. Choi said that when people are again in despair and tired of fighting, They will see her as a symbol of hope and strength. Suddenly, Hyoju appeared among the crowd, and people immediately recognized her and began to shout her name loudly. She modestly refuted the image that had been built of her as an exceptional person, explaining that she was not so unusual. But at the same time, she expressed her readiness to unite with those who wished to defend the city, promising to organize a guild with them. Guild is a term that originally referred to an association of merchants and artisans in medieval Europe. In modern games, the term is applied to a group of people who work together towards a common goal, a kind of club of interests. The investigator asked if guilds were like clubs. He was told that some guilds were indeed like clubs, but each had its own distinct style or vibe. Some behave like bandits, others like robbers, and others more like partners than friends. The investigator asked if they could also organize a guild. They told him that yes, it was possible to do this from the very beginning, but the system offered this option only at a high price. Establishing a guild cost 1 million PT. There were only 3 officially registered guilds. The rest remained in provisional status. The first of them was the Delonix Guild, founded by Hyoju, who held the position of guildmaster, with Uncle Ui as her deputy. Delonix was the most popular. Her main purpose was to protect the city and its inhabitants. The guild was originally named Hyoju, but she abandoned that name and renamed it after her favorite flower. The investigator noted that Hyoju is a very strong leader. She can be completely relied on, and there will be no problems with the guild. The second official guild is the 8th City Army. This guild took part in the first mission and had a large number of points. This was due to the competent command of Colonel Kimson and the precise execution of Junior Lieutenant Kwan. The investigator noted that the army is also very strong and has a bright future. The third and final official guild is the Kingdom, also known as the Imugi Guild. Despite the past events with Choi, they still had high-ranking weapons as powerful as his. They almost captured the city, which in itself was a significant achievement. Many bandits joined the guild, inspired by impunity. The kingdom's main and only goal was to destroy Choi and take control of the city. The investigator noted that the main enemy is very arrogant and will not calm down until he achieves victory. The second investigator added that the police are busy with petty criminals and protesters. Because of this, they don't have enough points to create their own guild, and the situation is getting worse. The investigator thought about this problem and asked what could be suggested in response. A man came out of the crowd and expressed his desire to serve the police. The whole crowd wanted this. The investigator, watching from the window, asked the second what he had been doing in his absence. The second replied that he was simply working and noted that he had not planned to gather his own people to get rid of the police. The investigator, however, was glad that the group had been assembled, as it would help solve the problem immediately. Between the Fox Man and the Bear Man, the policeman reported a suspicious reward for victims of sovereignty and showed a folder with information. The list included former prisoners and especially dangerous criminals from Earth. The investigator noted the strangeness of the absence of anyone other than the Amuga people and expressed dissatisfaction with the work of the police, who only dealt with the protesters. So promised to deal with everyone at once and ensure that the police were subordinated. The second listened, agreed, and noted that Choi was not only working for the Imugu, but was acting according to a complex plan, which, in his opinion, would lead to victory. Leaves with an agitation, depicting a mascot animal in the form, were gradually falling from the sky. The commander was surprised by the small number of volunteers and linked this to the frightening word mobilization. The fighters who arrived without orders aroused Kwan's sincere admiration. Kwan reported that supplies of ammunition and food were running low, but there was still enough electricity. The commander reminded, any civilization survives only after mastering its own production. City dwellers are spending their energy irrationally, which means that resistance to reforms is not expected. The Army's main trump card is the archived Declaration of the Fourth City 001, found in the destroyed sector. The document records the domestic and industrial solutions abandoned during the evacuation of residents. By combining the theory from the declaration and frontline experience, officers will formulate a comprehensive life support strategy. Choi sat on the roof of the TV tower, watching the city in the afterglow of its recent victory. There was an inner satisfaction in him, not from the awards he never received, but from the fact that the order he had conceived was beginning to take shape. The city had changed, become more organized and resilient, and that suited him. Khan approached him. She was holding a bag of chips and seemed at ease. Her mood was light, as if everything around her was already behind her and she had had a good time. She handed Choi the food, citing the pleasant experience of participating in the mission. She expected that Choi could create his own guild, but he was sure that a guild master inevitably becomes a victim of sovereignty, and therefore this path was not suitable for him. Khan persisted. Her interest in the topic of victims and possible solutions seemed no accident. She expressed her willingness to join Choi's future guild despite his hesitation. There was no drama in her words, only a firm intention to be there, even if it meant sacrificing sovereignty. Before leaving, she used the rope she had used earlier, leaving Choi alone on the roof with a bag of chips in his hands. He remained lost in thought. Her actions and words resonated with him, but they didn't change the essence. The sacrifices of sovereignty and the punishment of the Demon King were not part of his plan. The mission was completed, but the system deprived him of the reward due to his connections with the God of Gold, which means that Krasina received nothing either. By participating in the mission, he simply showed that if he went against him, he would lose, Choi thought as he ate his chips. If there is no response, he will simply continue. But if his guess is correct, the answer will not be long in coming. He is greedy enough to invent sovereignty and knows full well that Choi can remove that thirst. Choi feels a sharp break from his usual reality. The world crumbles like glass, and instead of the roof of the TV tower, an echoing white hall with cold walls, as if carved from light, opens up. In an instant, he raises his head and sees Krasina, preparing to strike, but space slides, but the blade breaks into emptiness. The picture changes. A chair, soft fabric under the palms. Behind him, Krasina's figure passes silently with a tray, as if everyday life and serenity here are inseparable from power. Another flash, and Choi is wearing someone else's outfit, heavy as a brand. In front of him on the table is a symbolic vase with pears and apples, a sign of hospitality and pretension at the same time. Krasina sits at a distance, and the silence around him drowns out any attempts to comprehend the situation. Choi gradually realizes that this is not the guest's illusion, but a demonstration of absolute oppression, the very force that can impose its own rules on reality. The Demon King of Sovereignty did not wait for a call. He himself appeared to mark the boundaries of the game. In a snow-white room where time seemed to stand still, Choi sat opposite the demon, who was drinking tea with astonishing calm. No threat, no gestures, only silence and an atmosphere, tense and scalding, like hot steam over a cup. Everything that happened was too neat, almost theatrical. Choi felt like he couldn't even speak, as if the environment itself was rejecting his voice. The demon already controlled not only space, but perception itself. His words were as thin as a blade. The meeting is not aggression, but an invitation to choose. He won't attack because he doesn't think it's necessary. Moreover, he doesn't think Choi is necessary. The phrase about 6 like Choi revealed the structure of the demon's power. For him, everyone is a chess piece, and Choi is just one of the possible ones. But for Choi, the demon himself is the only one, and therefore the danger is asymmetrical. Everything Choi thought was instantly revealed. The demon was playing ahead. An attempt to distract himself, to go into extraneous thoughts, turns into a predicted move. The main choice the demon offers is not combat, but roll determination. Remain a useless impulse, an illusion of attraction, or become a need, a necessity that the demon cannot neglect. Only in the second case, perhaps, will victims and punishments disappear. But even this possibility is not a promise, but an admission to potential significance. The book he mentioned is a metaphor for fate, a script, a rule. It will only be rewritten if Choi himself chooses and asserts his meaning to the demon. But if he chooses neither the path of need nor the role of useless attraction, then everything will lose its meaning. Even the many trials past will be devalued. After all, for a demon, it is not the effort that is important, but the significance. Choi realizes that what he is facing is not just force, but a will that offers choice, but dictates rules. There is no way to win here simply by resisting. You must either become something Krasen truly cannot lose, or disappear from his sight forever. Choi froze for a moment when he heard this, his mind refusing to accept the magnitude of what was said. One chance, just one, to change the fate of all units. Not your team, not a single guild. Everyone. The notification about the increase in experience raised the 8th city by 2 levels at once, which surprised most of the residents. The townspeople realized that many of their glasses remained unclaimed. The city's longevity has been partially restored. The system handed over the right to choose the reward to a mysterious player, but there was almost no real action from the so-called players. Kan noted that the 4th city player remained silent, as if preferring to sit it out or preparing an invisible plan. The reward for growth was the activation of an assistant, a level 30 NPC guard equipped with random melee armor. The city has received an automatic defender who will immediately attack any invader and will pay back aggressive citizens in kind. Panic broke out when people saw the power of the new guardian and rushed to get out of his way, fearing an accidental skirmish. Kan watched the events, believing that behind the scenes, someone was still controlling these empty figures for the upcoming game. A huge hand hovered over the system window, and a notification appeared about the result of Choi's full examination. No abnormal units were detected. Hidden block number 08 was marked by the system as a registration error, and confirmation was denied. A recheck and in-depth examination was required, with the threat of the unit's death. The player's hand chose to continue the examination. Choi was aware of the scale of the situation and realized that it was not just his city that was at stake, but others as well. The voice appeared suddenly, and it became clear that this was no ordinary demon. The scale of its capabilities was enormous. This demon wanted to achieve complete power, to take everything that belongs to the players, everything they know, hide, their bones, souls, and skin. He viewed the players as his enemies. Books hovered above Choi, symbolizing choice. Other demon kings rewarded players by turning them into higher beings and called missions, trials, or challenges. But this demon viewed missions as sacrifices and deprived them of choice by setting conditions. Choi saw this as a chance, an opportunity to change the course of events despite the harsh rules of the game, and was now deciding whether to continue on this dangerous path. Choi looked at the book and extended his hand. The book lit up. The demon thought about it and found the choice smart but obvious. The demon then erased this conversation from Choi's memory so that they would not be caught prematurely. Despite this, nothing has changed in Choi's situation. Change takes time and process. Choi fell into the unknown, but then opened his eyes and found himself on the roof. He thought that he must have fallen asleep right there. Krasina does not answer. The demon said that his child will guide Choi further. The evening twilight was thickening over the city. The streets were filled with laughter. Kang ran down the street, trying to get away from Hyoji. She hid behind the wall and looked back in surprise. Hyoji persistently pushed Kan against the wall, offering to become a member of the guild, and Kan stubbornly refused, repeating that she preferred to be alone and that they had never been friends. Kan glanced at her phone, where a message appeared offering to return 10 points. Hyoji insisted, calling Kang by an affectionate nickname and hugging her, but Kang asked her to let go, afraid of being burned by the touch. From afar, cries could be heard calling for release. During the intermission, you can return the glasses. The commander of the soldiers continuously repeated orders while the soldiers were training hard. The recovery time was only 30 minutes, a feature that not only healed serious injuries, but also increased the fighter's endurance. Your energy is restored as if you had slept for 10 hours. This feature increases productivity. The army was preparing, recovering, not even sleeping. They were simply absorbed in preparation. The civilians understand everything, and this is what determines survival in the next mission. The military was creating new weapons. Fresh blades and axes lay in the boxes. During the mission, the army planned evacuations to safe areas using a network of emergency contacts and compiling briefings. Preparations were in full swing, both in the Otherworldly Adventurers Guild and in the Raider headquarters. Everyone, including Choi and the players, worked without rest, constantly improving their skills and equipment. On the roof, Choi and the swordsman trained, knowing that this would be the key to their survival on the next mission. Meanwhile, in the bathhouse, loud laughter could be heard among the kids, and the schoolboy reminded them that even after such efforts, 10 points would still be returned for recovery. A fight started on the whim of a schoolboy. He declared that the strongest would become his right hand. So the day passed. Then a notification appeared that a new round had begun. The player's giant hand slowly grabbed the dice and threw it. The system then called on other players to roll the dice. The system announced that pawn number 8 had moved 3 squares and was now standing on the cannon tower. This location became the site of a co-op mission that would require the city's inhabitants to unite, which surprised Uncle Wee and Hedgehog. The system then began searching for targets for this mission. Choi stared at the book, watching what was happening. At the same time, the first 3 pawns also randomly landed on the cannon tower. The first of them is pawn number 17. Hiju, who had not yet lost hope, was surprised by the appearance of another pawn and another city that had not fallen. The investigator noted that there is a city on Earth similar to theirs. The second investigator added that if this was a city from Earth, it had probably changed a lot. On the wall of the cannon tower stood a knight in full combat gear. His armor reflected the faint light of the twilight, giving him an imposing and unwavering appearance. He kept a close eye on the surrounding area, ready to engage in battle or protect those under his protection at any moment. Quan was surprised to notice that the map was empty, although the cannon was located in the very center and looked quite powerful. It was announced that the difficulty level would depend on the sum of the dice rolled by all players. The sum of the first throw was 11, which determined the difficulty of the mission. The tower will randomly attack the city, and the player's task is to conquer it. The mission is time-limited. Each difficulty level is allocated 1 floor of the tower. There are 11 such floors in total, and the total time to complete the mission is 7 days. The mission began, and cannonballs were fired at the city. Heji quickly flew into the air and used her spear to stop the blows, showing her agility and precision. The investigator, preparing for the attack, used the power of his glove, directing the energy where it was possible to minimize damage, saving strength. Despite the tension, no residents were killed, which was the main achievement in this situation. The second investigator noted that the game protects the city as an object, not its people, emphasizing the cold logic of what is happening. The police were busy helping the wounded, and the health of pawn number 8, symbolizing the city, was gradually declining to 91.6%. Choi, watching from the roof, understood that the city itself was important to the game, not individual lives, because the game would end if the city was completely destroyed. He decided to check how things were going in another city. There, the residents turned with respect and hope to the great guardian of the city, praying for help and a miracle. The map of this city had magical protection that could repel direct physical attacks. She could take a certain amount of damage before being destroyed, with 99.40% health. The commander and the military confirmed that this matched the records of the fourth city. Choi realized that players could influence the course of the game using cards and dice rolls, two key mechanics for interfering with the game's events. The city's magical protection gave a sense of security, but it was not permanent, which added to the tension of the mission. Choi sat at the chessboard, feeling like a simple unit in the game, like a combat unit moving across the playing field. At this moment, the cannon was aimed at pawn number 8. There was less than an hour left before the shot. The soldiers discussed how the remaining guns were silent, probably recovering from the previous shots. They suddenly noticed movement ahead. It turned out to be an ambush. Kwon gave the order to break through, and a firefight began. The second and third vehicles were destroyed. 2 soldiers had minor injuries that will not affect the course of the battle. The soldiers tried to break through to the tower, promising to catch up with their comrades after the end of the current battle. Kwon reminded that, despite any injuries, they need to survive until the intermission, an important period of rest and recovery. Choi realized why the map was so simple. It was constantly changing, and at any moment new obstacles could appear. Monsters or the landscape could change. The driver asked if it was worth taking Hyuja along. Kwon replied that it would be too risky. If Haeju had gone with them to aim at the tower, the city would have been left without protection from the cannons. 2 of the team were to remain inside the city to carry out the mission. The Kwon decided to go on reconnaissance in the tower. They need to make a good first impression on the residents of city number 17, with whom they will have to cooperate. At this time, the schoolboy's car was moving forward with noise. The schoolboy was too busy to pay attention to formalities, irritating the soldiers in the military vehicle. 2 sports cars drove by, and Kwon thought that perhaps the war was on pause. The time until the last cannon fired was shortening. Cannonballs began to fly into the air. 3 shots, each cannon reloading at a different speed. The military noticed that the Imugu had already reached the tower. A voice was heard saying that they were a little late. At this time, a male knight approached Kwon and introduced himself as Robel von Lexus, a high-level character of the Special Citizen class. He asked if Kwon was from the first generation, which surprised him. Robel proposed to become allies, acting as a representative of the Lexus clan, an ancient clan endowed with a divine calling and guarding the sacred city for a century and a half. His proposal sounded like an invitation to joint defense and strengthening of the defense, based on many years of experience and traditions of the family. Kwon warned Robel of an important condition before concluding the alliance. He did not represent the entire city, but only the army of the 8th city. Robel acknowledged the lack of unity and noted that it was too early to join the union. Kwon asked that the city be given the intention of mutual non-aggression, an agreement that no one would attack first, and the decision on the fate of the attacker would be made by the victim. Robel added that such an alliance is aimed at the common good, and in the case of self-defense, the use of force is permitted. He relayed a plan for dealing with the gun turret based on the experience of their first mission, warning against repeating similar missions. Kwon took the information in and noted the need to be prepared for repeated testing. Kwon expressed gratitude and promised to provide information on friendly and hostile forces that shared or rejected their intentions. The question of patrols inside the tower arose, but Robel explained that it was difficult to get in without a detailed plan due to special security measures. Meanwhile, the schoolboy, trying to get inside, was getting irritated because of the impassibility. Robel stressed that the preparations were difficult and warned of the need to hurry, as the defense of the city did not rest on the shoulders of their allies alone. Choi reflected on the long history of the Lexus family, 150 years of protecting the sacred city. and the unusualness of their player. The swordsman, watching him, noticed Choi's ease and suggested action. Choi replied that he was looking for something important, and then opened the book to find a mention of a corporate mission with an unusual reward, a replacement for 100 victims of sovereignty. It looked like an additional quest that was not published on the general bulletin, but rather a personal task from Krasen. Although Choi expected Krasen to personally propose this mission, the silence indicated that his method was indeed working. He decided to begin the mission, realizing that at the end of their path, a meeting was possible. Either he would go, or they would come to him. Choi was racing through the sky between buildings and was spotted by people shouting loudly to warn each other. The man urged them to remain calm and remember their lessons. At that moment, the city's defender became active and began pursuing them. The cannon opened fire, the last of the defensive weapons. Hyoji began to defend the city, trying to control the energy she had borrowed, but was forced to use even her soul. The investigator cursed the wind, which was interfering with the battle, and barely dodged a flying cannonball. Choi used the legendary Tatlum Throw, a magical weapon capable of piercing even the divine eye of evil. The effect grew stronger with each use, and he risked using up the entire resource in one throw. The core cracked and exploded, Choi fell from the sky, and Hyoji watched the events unfold. The investigator acknowledged Hyoji's efforts, but she countered that it was Choi who had accomplished the feat. Choi's power was so great that even outside the city it could not be stopped. The cannon is smoked, preparing for the next shot, aimed at pawn number 17. There is exactly 1 hour left before the shot. At this point, the map began to change under the influence of destruction. Earthquakes began, which caused alarm among the military. Kwon examined the walls and found them to be strong enough, a fact the soldier confirmed by kicking the wall. Such walls would have been quite suitable for a shelter. The last gun continued to fire, and with each passing hour, the map changed, changing the structure of the terrain. He decided to check the information he had received with hostile forces to ensure its veracity, and only then build a plan of action. In the midst of these thoughts, Kwon shouted for reinforcements and for the need to set out. The soldier stood there, upset, trying to hold on to the damaged vehicle, whose wheels were flying in all directions because of the wall. Kwon thought they might have to replace cars with horses to keep moving. Choi moved across the sky using coordinates as a guide. He marked out a plot of land measuring 10 by 10 centimeters, 20 centimeters below on the left, above, and on the right. Then he put the block in the book, and it disappeared. The corporate mission was accomplished. A replacement for the victim of sovereignty was required, a strange and incomprehensible task. At that moment, the cube glowed pink, and the demon broke it. The demon noted that he had received a fragment of the key, the part that would open the great door to collapse. The demon acknowledged that Choi had proven his worth and was now under his protection as long as Choi was still useful. The city guardian suddenly appeared behind Choi. Immediately, a system notification sounded, granting NPC authority for in-depth investigation. Choi was surprised. Why was the NPC outside the city? The answer came immediately, granting the right to act autonomously. It seemed like a bug, and Choi tried to stop the NPC's hand, but was too late. The next notification stated that the NPC's ability level had risen to 600, the same as the investigation targets. At that moment, Choi felt a sharp pain. The NPC pierced his shoulder through and through. This was the first phase of an in-depth investigation. The system immediately began a medical examination of the victim. Choi looked at the wound on his shoulder in surprise and wondered how the NPC could be so strong. At that moment, an isolated area opened up and the NPC attacked again. Choi was able to kick her in the face and she was sent flying, but just as he was about to get out of the area, the NPC grabbed his leg. The system reported that the investigation target cannot leave the area and take part in the game until the survey is completed. Choi, confused, asked what exactly he was being investigated for. The answer was, there was a suspicion of cheating or a bug, because he reached the maximum level too quickly, which is impossible with the current progress. Choi thought about it and admitted that he had indeed reached this level from the very beginning of the investigation, trying to understand the reason for the attack. He attacked again, claiming that everything was according to the rules. The system announced that a deep investigation was underway to check compliance with the rules. In the event of a violation, the target will be eliminated and the investigation will be closed. Choi swore that everything was fair and demanded to speak with the system administrator. Everything is moving fast. The Otherworldly Adventurers Guild, the Rangers, were moving forward, ready to explore, not fight. The Guildmaster reminds them that resources, like gas, are in short supply. It is better to save them for critical moments, so they traveled on bikes. The cannonball hit the house, and Pawn Number 8's health dropped to 82.49%. The investigator notes with alarm the scale of the destruction, but Heiju is confident that everything is going according to plan. The atmosphere in the city is changing, and plans to build a city defensive wall are already in motion. Purchasing materials, designing, distributing workers, everything must be clear and coordinated. Hedgehog is offered to become a springboard for defense. Her abilities are an important resource. The Guildmaster admired the structure of the new walls. Uncle helped with carrying provisions to the shelter. On the streets, you can hear talk about the strength of the cores, and even ordinary passers-by are thinking about how these materials can be used. Kan, watching the core, thoughtfully looks for ways to profitably sell the information he has received. Hyoju realizes that there are many unstable factors around him. Choi, the mad dog, the schoolboy, all creating chaos. The investigator and Hyeju are determined to make the most of the current situation. Behind them, a man in a rare shadow suit watches quietly. Armor that increases speed and is almost invisible in the dark. The cannon continued to mercilessly bombard the city, reducing Pawn Number 17's health to 99.21%. Roble watched the situation closely and noted, "This city really has great potential. A month since the mission began, and they have already reached this level." But he had given them too much information. He knew that in a cooperative mission, that was a double-edged sword. Over-revealing strategies could work against them. Character: Hank's Said level. 33. Rank: High-ranking citizen. The woman with a serious look emphasized that the strength of the Allies was important precisely because it would minimize losses among the inhabitants. It was Emma Hilt, a high-ranking citizen with a level of 47, whose wisdom and experience inspired confidence. Next to her stood a man named Kane Weor, who had reached level 50 and had considerable authority. He recalled that in other circumstances such a group would have been quickly destroyed, but now the situation is different. Roble, observing what was happening, remained confident that the course of events was developing according to someone's carefully thought-out plan. His calm smile hinted that there was something more behind all this, the will of an unknown that man, whose intentions remained a secret. A notification about the support of magic appeared, thanks to which all actions of residents were accelerated by 1 day and 6 hours. Based on the results of the dice roll, the actions of Pawn Number 17 were accelerated by 3 hours. Roble called on the city's inhabitants to victory in the name of God, convincing them that they were the chosen ones, loved by God, and that their strength and faith would make them invincible. His legendary one-handed sword, capable of summoning thunder and using chain lightning magic, was a symbol of this sacred mission. He emphasized that cities and people who do not receive God's love will not be able to win this game, no matter their strength or level. Meanwhile, the city's defender had his foot on Choi's throat, who protested, claiming that he was not under his power. He knew he was up against an opponent equal in strength, but he acknowledged his weaknesses in hand-to-hand combat. His advantage was based on his possession of rare items. He recalled training with martial artist Jack, who had prepared him for such situations, but Choi still considered himself a beginner. The NPC continued to attack despite the danger to Choi's life. The system recorded a 98% chance of repeat cheating under extreme conditions, meaning the attacks would continue until the target died. Choi realized that the NPC was indifferent to his fate, and, to deal with the situation, summoned a sword master, the Goblin Jack. Now the enemy found itself in a 2-against-1 situation. The NPC announced that summoning colleagues or assistants in isolated areas was prohibited, which put Choi in an extremely difficult position. He realized that he had lost a lot of time and must return before the last cannon reduced the city to ruins. As the medical examination continued, Choi thought that the NPC's attacks were not particularly cunning, but she did not stop attacking, and he wanted to tame her fury for at least a moment. At the most critical moment, Choi thought that this was his end, but the demon could not allow this. Choi turned around and heard a system announcement that the investigation target had survived. The NPC was surprised, and then a new system message appeared about Choi acquiring a new skill from Krasen's book, the Lord's Domain. This skill allowed one to control 4 overlords and use their abilities, although the busy overlord was unavailable during missions. Among the rulers was the swordmaster Goblin Jack. Number 1. Choi wondered why this function hadn't been mentioned before. The system reminded him that Goblin Jack's swordmaster abilities had just been acquired. Choi expressed dissatisfaction with the demon, but promised to first complete the investigation and then deal with him. The NPC went on the offensive and a fierce battle began. Choi was prepared for battle and thought that the high-level and powerful equipment of the NPCs did not guarantee absolute superiority. In any game, if you lack levels or equipment, control over the enemy becomes key. It is better not to meet him directly. Jack's swordsmanship could maintain this control, but once the body is fully trained, it becomes difficult to counter. Choi suddenly exclaimed, "Ghost?" Component placement, hinting at the state where someone else's soul moves into the player's body. Jack appeared, but a different one. The fencer confirmed that he himself was struck by this phenomenon, but he explained that it was useless. The opponent was still stronger. Despite Choi's skill, his body is not yet capable of handling such power, and his skills are not enough to do so. Choi sighed heavily, apologized, and accepted the situation, preparing for further combat. A system window suddenly appeared in front of Choi, asking if he wanted to hand over control of his body. He agreed, he thought, feeling the tension around the NPC standing nearby. In the tense moment, Jack Choi quickly cut off her hand, using the ability 7 steps of strong wind, masterfully dodging and moving quickly in a straight line. A technique borrowed from the swordsman Jack. The NPC immediately went on the attack, but Choi dodged it using Sky Wolf Saber and a Moonclaw attack. Choi mentally restrained himself and Jack from killing his rival. He activated the 3-blade chi, and the NPC collapsed to the ground. Choi Jack grumbled that it was possible to explain everything at once, but Choi's inner voice reminded him that there was no chance of that. Realizing the urgency of the situation, he decided to take the opportunity to reconcile, an action that would improve his relationship with the NPC and teleport her back to her original location. The cost of reconciliation was 50,000 points, but it was a reasonable insurance against accidental conflicts with the inhabitants. Choi agreed to purchase the reconciliation, hoping that the medical examination would not be repeated and the situation would be resolved without further complications. Choi was surprised to see that nothing was happening, which began to worry him. The medical examination was declared complete, and no signs of shutdown or damage were found. But suddenly, a strange sound was heard that made him wary. The inspection began, or so it seemed. Quan carefully studied the book he received from Roble and said that now it was time to confirm the information he had received. He carefully closed the book and, taking the initiative, announced the plan of action. He would go forward himself, and Min would follow him, while the others would cover them. The soldier, noticing the new equipment, immediately recognized the heroic class item that had fallen from the bone of the god of gold. Quan noted that it's always a good idea to bring several pieces of equipment with you on a hike, even if you don't always use them, and that some of them can be called upon as needed, which is convenient and saves space, especially in a car. Helden's Shield. A heroic class shield. The shield of the heretic Helden, the faith of those who follow him, works wonders. The soldiers understood that without such a shield, it would be much more difficult for them. Inspired, the group moved to attack. Shots were heard from the tower, and the shield created by Quan formed a powerful divine energy barrier, which was strengthened by mutual understanding between comrades. Before entering the gun tower, they prepared themselves carefully. Quan and the military went inside, knowing that the side door of the mini-tower would lead to the goblin controlling it. This goblin took a bullet to the forehead, a precise headshot. Killing him would unlock a low-level ID card. It was known that by collecting 100 of these cards, one could obtain a high-level card, and 100 of these high-level cards turned into a master card. With such a card, you can get into the tower, but only in a group of 10 people. You'll have to create as many master cards as possible and recruit enough people to raid the tower. Imugi noted with irritation that the game's internal logic was too complex and illogical. The schoolboy expressed dissatisfaction, and the girl assured him that she would find a way to solve the problem. At that moment, Kan appeared. She unexpectedly offered useful information. The girl, Uni, level 17, an ordinary resident, greeted Kan with caution and prepared to defend her place. The schoolboy threatened Kan, but she remained confident and willing to share her information. Kan said the deal would determine their future relationship, which surprised the student. She explained that she was the one who obtained information about the god of gold during the previous mission, and reminded everyone of her second place in the competition, which was supposed to convince everyone of her worth. The schoolboy thought about it, and the girl suggested listening to Kan. If Kan didn't have any useful information, they would simply kill her. Uni, with a clear dose of sarcasm and disbelief, expressed the hope that Kan's information would be useless, which only added fuel to the fire. Kan, on the other hand, calmly teased Uni, saying that smiling more often is good for you, even if it adds wrinkles. The schoolboy remained at a loss, feeling fear and uncertainty in this tense situation. The cards hung in the air, and Robel raised his hand, announcing that he had received 12 high-level ID cards. Everything was going well. He asked about the losses, to which they reported that 42 people were killed and 123 were injured. Robel reminded them of the need for caution, but the soldiers became too enthusiastic about the mission, which led to such losses. Although this did allow for more cards to be collected, Hunt noted. Robel began to pray, calling not to die for the gods, but to live for them. They moved on. According to Sir Quan, the strongest resident of the 8th city was Choi, who suddenly stopped appearing. Despite Choi's dangerous gear, it was his strength that was feared, but the fact that he did not use it for the good of the city. It spoke of his worthlessness in the eyes of others, despite his potential. The system temporarily disabled the inspection of current effects. Choi could not move. Electric arcs appeared around him, restraining his movements. The study of his memory began. Sensory, explicit, and unconscious. All memories of an anomalous unit that resisted the game system were dangerous due to contact with the anomaly. Memories began to surface in his mind, filling his head with heavy thoughts. His body was racked with pain, but he tried to hold it back despite the humiliation and internal struggle. Connection with the subject is broken. The protocol expands the scan to game memories. Choi remembers himself at his laptop at home, tracking investments on the screen. Hundreds of millions are burning in his accounts. His assets are growing, but he is busy with his future part-time job. Tablet notifications are layered on top of a chess game, a streak of thousands of wins in a row. The telephone conversation with my mother takes place under the guise of cheerfulness. Anxiety is hidden inside. The system intrudes deeper, but the feeling of intrusion causes Choi to internally protest. Automatic control records the absence of an anomalous threat and collapses the scan. Conclusion: risk is zero. Verification conditions are met. Subject's participation is again permitted. Choi woke up lying on a white surface. The space around him was sterile, without shadows, without a horizon, as if outside of the game and reality. The system automatically restored his stamina with the Health 100 bonus, but with a reminder. In combat, the restoration only works at half capacity. He noted that even during the Demon King's punishment, his regeneration was blocked. The conclusion was obvious. Regardless of the maximum level, power is limited by the boundaries of the game. He felt these limitations pressing on him. Digital boundaries, systemic conditions, invisible but inherent. Choi stood up and thought that just being strong wasn't enough. He needed power, one that could overcome the very structure of the world, that would allow one to go beyond the limits, to surpass the unit, to surpass the inhabitant. He needed something that would change the very essence of the game. The cannon fired another salvo, and the heroic shield of black steel managed to take the blow. Pawn number 17's health dropped to 98.24%, and the shield itself dissolved into a dusting of sparks. Choi, lying on the bare stone platform, noted again that even his ultimate level was only a conditional peak, while the system still dictated the limits of strength. On the edge of the field is one of the townspeople, Kim, who lost his glasses in the last mission and, along with them, the chance to save his 7-year-old daughter. He crept up on Choi, preparing to take revenge for his dashed hopes. The thin blade of the blade only touched the throat of the lying man. The steel instantly crumbled into flakes. Choi's passive defense worked instantly and silently. With a movement of his palm, he activated the paralyzing pressure, a point acupuncture technique, and Kim's body went limp. Choi looked at the paralyzed man with cold fatigue. If someone really wants revenge, they'll have to at least come close to his level. Otherwise, it's not even a challenge. He decided that he would turn these people into victims of sovereignty, as an example to others, so that no one would have the desire to approach without permission. The truck was moving along a dusty road, with people sitting in the back, wrapped in raincoats and tired after the recent events. One of them, with his head down, guiltily uttered words of regret for dragging his friends into danger. However, they did not reproach him. They supported him, understanding that everything happened out of emotion. He warned his friend, "In future it is worth acting with calculation, and not in the heat of the moment." Choi acted fairly in his own way. To take revenge, you need not rage, but strength, characteristics, equipment, skills. With these words, the oath of revenge sounded. A young man named Kim, only level 9 and still in the normal citizen class, vowed that he would become stronger. He would reach the top, overcome all barriers, and one day he would definitely kill Choi. Choi stood on top of the wall, his eyes following the truck as it drove away. The swordsman's voice rang out. He asked, restrainedly, but with a hint of reproach, was it really necessary to turn them into victims of sovereignty? Choi didn't look away. His voice was calm, without hesitation. He explained that he had punched the boy in the forehead to make him stop. Otherwise, he would have continued to break down, endangering his own comrades. But, he added, the main reason was different. If they had stayed in the city even a few minutes longer, they would have been destroyed by the next wave. His words were cut off as a threat materialized in the air before him. A new boss. It was an octopus death machine. a structure assembled from many mini-towers that merged into one combat unit. She moved freely, regardless of the terrain, and was armed with guns that fired in all directions. The boss's difficulty was 5. Choi chuckled. He knew the rules. Every few hours a boss would appear in the zone, defeating which would give a reward, a master card. It was precisely this kind of map that could be used to enter the cannon tower, the key point of defense. It was much more profitable than endlessly farming low-level ID cards from regular enemies. But he also understood the path was not easier, just shorter, and deadly dangerous. Choi hovered in the air with his sword in hand, rapidly approaching the massive bulk of the field boss, an octopus-shaped death machine. 7 metal tentacles with roaring turbines pushed off the ground, creating craters in the dust and cracks in the stone. As he approached the ground, Choi struck. Skill! Sky Wolf Saber Fang, a martial arts technique passed down by the swordsman Jack. The attack came down from above like a thunderclap from the sky. Choi felt the blade slide across his shield, cutting through layer after layer of defenses. The swordsman made a remark. Choi was making too many unnecessary movements, wasting ki on showmanship. Efficiency is more important. He advised using simpler techniques, not for weakness, but for precise control. Choi nodded. He understood that strength was not a flash, but a steady flame. Jack had warned, haste breeds weakness. The swordsman got to the point. He knew Choi was going to enter the cannon tower. But Choi replied that it was not the time yet. He can't afford to be locked into a mission while there is unfinished business. There is no way back in the tower, either victory or death. Now, we need to finish something outside. The swordsman chuckled softly. He didn't try to guess what Choi had in mind. But if you think about it, he would say, Choi would go back into the thick of things. For example, into the Alliance headquarters. The figure in front of Choi straightened up, his voice filled with contempt and bitter sarcasm. Choi's name, spoken aloud, carried a strange weight with it. He became a symbol of destruction, an elemental force that rips the game apart. Choi announced his warning to the king's player, accusing him of betrayal from the very beginning. He stated that he knew about the impending attack by the residents of their city and the invasion of their territory, and also about the intention to strike in the back at the most crucial moment of the mission. The king tried to change the subject, but admitted that it was pointless given Choi's possession of an important book. In response, Choi issued an ultimatum: either stop the betrayal, or he would destroy each one personally. The king was dubious, wondering if arrogance could be leveled up among abilities. He noted that he knows Choi's strength firsthand, but emphasized that Choi has not yet encountered a real god. A notification about the start of a special event, a legendary duel, has appeared on the battlefield. The system summoned Unit Chol and Mayor Lemu Los, leveling them up to the minimum of 99. Lemu, wielding the mythical two-handed sword Claymore Jupiter, attacked Chol, promising that with his death no one would know of God's plans. The sword brought down thunderous lightning, creating an atmosphere of power and horror. Choi, although he admitted his lack of experience, used his defense and swordsmanship, summoning a magical blue dragon face, which impressed even the swordsman's spirit. The mayor was defeated and lay powerless on the floor. At this point, the knights joined them, shouting, "Your Majesty!" as they prepared for a joint mission. However, the player watched what was happening. Choi noticed that the knights were glowing red. Energy, bloodlust, and even madness had taken hold of them. This created an unsettling atmosphere, foreshadowing even more dangerous trials ahead. Quan hid behind the wall, watching as the red-eyed knights advanced steadily. The troops retreated hastily into the city, which was in chaos. The inhabitants, overcome by madness, furiously attacked each other. Their ability levels grew rapidly, turning the city into a veritable army of madness. At that moment, Choi flew out of the castle window, trying to understand what was happening. The fencer next to him explained, "This is a knife in the back, a betrayal hidden from the very beginning." The golden sword rose into the air, symbolizing the growing danger. No one expected such reckless cruelty. The mayor, overcome with rage, growled, his eyes burning with scarlet flames. Chui landed on the ground and came face to face with a group of people. A mother, a wife, and 2 children. They had knives, spears, weapons in their hands, and smiles on their faces. They treated him the same way players treat their pawns, mercilessly and heartlessly. A magical attack with a focus on destroying the inhabitants has occurred, and the system has issued a new notification, foreshadowing a new wave of trials and dangers. Choi stood surrounded by people in the square. He understood that clearing the cannon tower would take at least a day, and during that time the residents would inevitably encounter the madmen. The fencer offered to take on the task, but Choi refused. At that moment, 3 attackers suddenly approached from behind and swung their weapons, but Choi managed to warn that control of the situation was completely in his hands. People were scattered from the force of Choi's blows. He delivered powerful blows, parrying the attacks. Pieces of bodies and blood covered the area around. Choi looked up to see a system warning about the impossibility of verifying information about the enemy's hidden unit appear on the screen. The air was filled with flashes of magic and tension. The mayor and Roble came out into the square, shouting and attacking Choi with their swords. Choi, without giving up, said farewell words to them, reminding them of the debt he was going to collect for 150 years on the throne. At the decisive moment, his blow was accurate. The mayor's head flew off, and the crown fell to the ground with a crash. Night fell on the blood-stained square. Choi stood among the dead bodies, lost in heavy thoughts. The fencer asked how he felt. The answer was negative. The preparation did not help him cope with reality. The knowledge that the city's inhabitants would have a hard time carrying out the mission weighed heavily on him. He knew he had to act quickly and decisively. Suddenly, a system notification appeared. Player 17 had lost all of his units, and the tower in front of him had begun to collapse. If the player fails to resurrect or replenish troops, he will lose his rights and turn into the maximum difficulty boss, the City Devourer. A City Eater is a player who has not lost, but has not managed to finish the game. Choi looked at the destroyed tower. So, even a player is not an absolute figure in this game. Even he can be rejected. Players are not the pinnacle, not the final form. The system monitors the boundaries, and if someone crosses them, their fate changes. System notifications appeared. Player 17's remaining units were rapidly decreasing. First 45,644, then 25,351, then 8,594. Soon, only 112. The numbers disappeared one by one. One of the hands belonging to the green player touched the interface. The menu item, Report Unfair Play, was opened. The complaint contained the item, Possession of an Abnormal Unit. He selected this option. The system responded. The complaint was accepted. Diagnostics started. A second later, another message appeared. No anomalies, bugs, or signs of cheating were detected. The system notification appeared on the screen again. The player's remaining units were 17. 0. The message, You have lost. Immediately after that, another one. You are no longer a player. And finally, you will be removed from the system and turned into a City Eater. Thank you for playing the game. The former player's eyes glowed scarlet. The player changed his color to red and raised his weapon, pointing it towards the city. The yellow player activated the system notification. A window opened in front of him with options: card, bone, skill, store, hit. He pressed the button in the center. A yellow hand reached out to a new notification. The system gave a description of a special magic skill: Emergency Disappearance. Using it allowed you to fail the mission early and move the pawn with a dice roll. All rewards for the current mission were cancelled. The red player was already finishing his swing. Choi was rushing forward. The yellow hand continued to choose actions. Hyoju and the investigators also rushed to the side. Kwon watched everything that was happening around him. Their goal was to reach the TV tower. People in the city hugged their children and watched in horror. The yellow hand selected the desired point. At the same moment, the red player's blow fell on the city. The world was swallowed by darkness. Choi was falling into the abyss. His red book was spinning around. He didn't understand what had happened. He only had time to think that the city was over before he found himself back in the white space. Choi looked back. There was a demon standing next to him. He immediately recognized him. Krasin. The demon reached out and touched his forehead. Then he said, not hiding his cold mockery, "Get out of the way, arrogance." Whether he will remain just an object of interest or become necessary is up to Choyu to decide. He thought for a moment. The demon continued. As agreed, he had proven his usefulness, and thus received a chance. Choi stood up and followed him. He remembered the others and asked a question. The demon did not beat around the bush. He confirmed that the city was destroyed and all its inhabitants were dead. Choi dropped to his knees. The demon explained that the city devourer was not just a monster, but a twisted version of the player himself, and no units could stop him. Only the player can defeat the devourer, and therefore the outcome of the battle was predetermined. Choi burst into tears. He didn't understand what kind of game this was, who was behind all this, why he was still alive. The demon calmly replied that he had answers to all the questions, but the time had not yet come. Now they had to hurry, to return the city and its inhabitants. The demon's words seemed impossible to Choi. He asked again. The demon confirmed. If Choi fulfilled the condition, everything would be returned. He couldn't believe it, but he really had nothing to lose. The demon noted his readiness, and a sword appeared in front of Choi. The demon allowed him to use his power. If he could kill the devourer, then everything lost would return. Choi took up the weapon. The reality of his proposal seemed ridiculous, almost mocking. To slay the devourer with one sword. Total crap, he thought. Choi found himself in a distorted space, with the devourer towering in front of him. The creature was painted bright red. Its presence was literally oppressive. Without warning, he struck. And Choi, before he could react, flew back, the air rushing out of his lungs, blood pouring from his mouth. The pain was searing, sharp, piercing. Choi didn't understand how he was still alive. A voice rang out in my head. Familiar, commanding. It was Krasin. He confirmed. The devourer is the strongest creature within the book. Even players try to avoid direct combat with it. Krasin reminded that although he had transferred his power to Choi, thereby making him equal with the players, he could not give more. Win or lose, it was Choi's personal responsibility. He grimaced. So if he lost, it would be his fault. The devourer raised his hand again, reaching for the cube. This time, Choi was on guard. The system has activated the skill. Legendary Meteor Shower. Meteorites were supposed to fall from the sky, the number of which was determined by throwing a 12-sided die. The die spun in the air. The demon explained that Choi now had power equivalent to the player. All his actions, abilities, and even items work according to the same rules as the players. Choi concentrated. Meanwhile, the devourer's face began to crack, rays bursting out of his head. Choi succeeded. The creature changed, as if it had disintegrated. Its body was cut into pieces. Choi breathed heavily and, turning to the book, said the demon's name. Krasin. The book responded immediately. Choi asked if all the devourers and players looked like this. The answer didn't come right away. Another monster emerged from the mist before him. Multiple arms, tentacles, disfigured faces, eyes surrounded by claws. Krasin answered, "Of course not. The appearance and essence of each of them are different, and the forms, and the goals, and even the remnants of reason, everything is individual." The demon reminded that each devourer and player has their own deck of cards, strategy, and set of privileges. The system announced, the enemy used the heroic ability Lightning Storm, and the yellow-crimson sky flared up over the field. Choi found himself thinking that there must be eaters out there that were much more dangerous than this one, and he was overcome with shame. The current enemy was clearly using the game's capabilities awkwardly and irrationally. Two blades hovered nearby, the legendary Storm Petrel and the mythical Zweihander Jupiter. The system clarified that the active skill, Chai Control, allows the owner to control the weapon from a distance with constant mana expenditure. Choi analyzed the enemy's behavior. Despite the many weapons, the devourer kept his distance and clearly avoided close combat. This confirmed his suspicion. The monster preferred to rely on large-scale heroic attacks designed to cover a wide area of effect. A system notification has been issued. The Strike ability has been activated. Strike from all sides. Choi crossed his arms, preparing to defend himself. He was finally convinced. In front of him was not a PvP master, but simply an arrogant player accustomed to relying on brute force and powerful cards. Such an opponent does not understand the essence of a one-on-one fight. True PvP is the art of precise decisions, measured reactions, and control, not a mindless show of force. The monster was very close. Choi pushed off the ground sharply, and a bright light flashed around him. A heroic class tool had been activated, a free travel ticket. This ticket allowed teleportation to any previously visited location, but for residents, it was a one-time use. The demon explained that even though Choi would be able to move instantly, he would still have to approach the monster slowly. The fear of the silhouette growing with each passing second will force the devourer to use his cards more and more recklessly. Endless attacks without a plan, and tactics make no sense. That's how this fight will end. Choi chuckled. While the monster was planning his executions, playing God, he was already suffering defeat. Then the weather change sphere, a legendary class tool, was activated. It changed the weather in a small area, and the duration of the effect depended on the rank and the chosen element. One-time active skill. The demon reminded him of Reboot, a special skill of the Jupiter sword that absorbs all thunder elements. When the overload state is reached, the owner takes damage from their own lightning charge, but their attacks also become incredibly powerful. The monster's eyes widened. Choi noted that he was not holding the Chi Control sword in his hands, but Jupiter, and said, "Tremble with fear." Choi moved forward, under the starry sky. Monsters stood in front of him, surrounded by a yellow glow. The system reported that enemies in a state of electrical shock and overload take double damage from Jupiter. By activating the skill Thunder God's Fury and the innate sword skill, Choi instantly released the accumulated power of the thunder elements. The devourer was lying on the ground, but still alive. Choi was surprised. He wanted to know more about him, but he decided to revive all the dead first. As he plunged his sword into the monster, he noticed the blade beginning to become covered in flesh. The demon warned him to step back. He would need it later. Choi was surprised to see that the sword was stabbed straight into the devourer's body, and a round ball appeared in front of him and began to crack. A demon emerged from the egg, appearing as repulsive as before. The demon and Choi exchanged glances, the demon reluctant to fulfill his promise, while Choi was determined. Suddenly the city began to recover, but remained empty. Choi noticed this and expressed displeasure. But the demon explained that the Devourer's restoration was only enough for part of the city. A full revival will require more Devourer bodies and significant forces. Choi couldn't help but feel annoyed as he reminded him that even if the Devourer's powers were exhausted, the demon still had power. He explained that the points that residents use are converted into city experience, affecting trade, stats, and recovery. And players receive in-game currency for this, with which they buy cards and form strategies. This is how game resources are processed, and different tactical combinations are created. Choi realized that the glasses he was using weren't transferring into the city's experience. They were disappearing somewhere. The demon laughed, anticipating the reaction, and explained that Choi could see through despair, even when the city was falling under the onslaught of the Devourer. The demon has power, but he is not ready to reveal it yet. He assured that the promise will definitely come true, like fate. Above the city, the demon showed Choi the true structure of the game. 2 hands with pieces that move along a road, and many other players with their pieces. Choi was amazed. He hadn't noticed this before. The demon explained that everything the player sees really exists, and the rest is simply hidden, as if non-existent. A monster with huge teeth appeared in front of Choi. The demon said that 3 more bodies of city eaters need to be obtained in order to bring back the inhabitants and return the 8th city to the game. This body belongs to a new player, like Krasina's pawn. A dice appeared in Choi's hands, a symbol of the beginning of a new test. Choi rose into the air. The flight card was activated. The air trembled with energy behind him. There was a monster standing in front of him. It began to vibrate and disintegrated into 3 forms. Now, there were 3 of them. The 3 bodies moved simultaneously. Their movements were precise and mirror-like. They were one being. The system activated the barrier. The card is a heroic defense. 1 card covered 3. The shield flickered and vibrated. Enemy energy was repelled. Then the shield flared outward. Defense became offense. A wave of power passed through the field. 3 figures equipped weapons. The card is a normal class longsword. The swords were weak, but their power was shared among everyone. The enhancement was spread evenly. They charged. Blades flashed through the air. Choi retreated. The barrier cracked under the onslaught. He hovered in the sky, watching. A thought entered his head. This is one Devourer, divided into 3 bodies. Choi's expression tense, determination evident in his face, in response to the demon's threats. People stand in the void. The space is dull and lifeless. The demon sits, a glass of wine in his hand, his gaze focused. The demon completes his preparations, his smile calm and sinister. Hyoji looks around, not understanding where they are. Kang looks ahead, feeling a strange emptiness. The demon rises before the crowd. The voice makes everyone turn around. He calls his name, Krasina, and declares himself the savior. People are stunned. The tension in the crowd is growing. The demon talks about returning, about the 8th city, about his role. The Amugi clenches his fists, a challenge in his eyes. He senses the possibility of becoming stronger, looking at the demon as a target. The demon's magic paralyzes movement. The space is compressed. The Amugi cannot move. Their consciousness is caught in the spell. Krasina orders to listen, not to speak. He offers a choice: life with continuation of the game, or an easy death. A portal with 2 swinging doors appears in the air. The crowd wavers, doubt and fear in their voices. Some bow, accepting their fate. Others freeze in horror. Krasina rises as an arbiter between worlds. Magic thickens around her, and the world freezes on the threshold of a decision. A hand reaches out from the crowd in the hall. People stand in silence. It's Hyoji. When can I choose? she asks. The demon notices the movement and turns to the side. He bows slightly, feigning respect. The people's faces are tense. They are waiting for an answer. The demon points his hand at a huge screen hanging in space. An image of Choi fighting a monster appears on the screen. People turn to the screen. Hyoji recognizes Choi. The demon explains that the door will only open once Choi is defeated. The screen flashes, showing the battle in real time. Choi stands in the middle of a destroyed area, with 3 monsters in front of him. The skill is activated. A magical gravity ball creates a funnel. All objects and bodies around him are pulled into the center of the spell. Choi himself barely holds on, standing at the edge of the attraction. The monsters attack from 3 directions, closing the circle. The space is filled with blood. Sword strikes cut the air. The airwaves distort from the force of the impacts, like scars in the sky. One of the monsters is torn in 2 by a powerful explosion of light. Choi's sword is covered in blood as he plunges it into his fallen enemy. Choi is breathing heavily, his face covered in sweat and dust. The thought in his head is that he doesn't have time to heal in battle. He considers the need for automatic recovery. The background is filled with bright light. The fight is still not over. The demon watches the screen with a slight smile. The tension in the room is growing. People feel that the moment of choice is near. He looks ahead coldly and mentally demands to summon the next enemy. The dark page of the book begins to glow. A demon's voice sounds from it. Choi stands in a ruined battlefield, facing the void from which a silhouette is born. The space is distorted. The last devourer appears. Choi feels that if he defeats this one, he will be able to return all the inhabitants. The Moonblade, a normal-class sword, appears in his hand, and a weak magical shield flares up around it. The monster appears close, a sharp approach. Choi has no time. In another dimension, a crowd of people stands in front of a screen showing a fight. Hyoji clenches his fists as he stares at the screen, fear in his eyes. People are starting to understand what they'll have to face if they return to the game. Panic and doubt grow. The monster looks terrifying. Choi analyzes the enemy's style. Everything is based on pain and physical impact. He understands that there are many ways to win, but there is critically little time. The sword rises up. Choi strikes. Blood flies to the side. Suddenly, a text from the system appears in front of him. Whether to hand over control. He makes a choice. The body must be in safe hands. The space is distorted. Choi's body takes on a different silhouette. Jack, a swordsman, appears on the field, ready for battle. He doesn't need any explanations. He immediately rushes into the attack. His blade flies across the field like light piercing the night. There is not a single area on the monster's body that his blow has not hit. People in the crowd freeze, watching every movement. Blood flows down the blade of the sword. The fight is coming to an end. The screen goes dark. The demon's voice echoes throughout the hall. The mystical gates open before everyone. The demon announces, "The door is open. The choice is yours." People hesitate. To choose a life with new pain or eternal peace,